Welcome to episode 7 in our interview series with the world-renowned Jonathan Bluestein, visiting us today from lovely, is it Israel, my friend?
Yes, it is.
Awesome. Jonathan of Blue Jade Martial Arts. Jonathan, welcome. And please, you had something on your mind? Please share it with us.
Oh, yeah, sure. I would love to kick it off with something that I gather all martial artists should be talking about. I would phrase it in the original Chinese. So in Chinese martial arts culture, we say "gang rou xiang ji." So you're probably familiar with this. I'm not sure whether you two are familiar with this in Chinese, "gang rou xiang ji." That is, but you know what it means. Hard and soft coexist, right?
Yes.
Hard and soft coexist. And it's important to know that in English we say hard and soft, but gang and rou are actually not exactly hard and soft, but gang is firm and rou is pliable. Because it's not like hard and stiff, soft as in flaccid, but rather something that is firm but not stiff, pliable but not flaccid. That's gang and rou. There are different words for soft being flaccid and hard being stiff. By the way, as an anecdote, the name of the Okinawan martial art Goju Ryu, Go and Ju is gang and rou in Chinese. So these are the same characters. So why am I kicking this off with gang rou xiang ji? I think we have an imbalance in the world of martial arts and also in a parallel universe in which I exist, and that is the universe of traditional Chinese medicine. And that imbalance is that people do not take the time to offset what they do either in medicine or in martial arts with something to countermeasure their tendencies and inclinations that they develop with their main type of gongfu. So that is to say, if we were to use another Chinese cultural term, wenwu. Wenwu is culture and martiality. Okay, the culture and the martial. Wenwu. So and in English we say the pen and the sword, right? So that's the equivalent. And what I find is martial artists forget that if they would like to deepen their practice and their understanding of their styles, whichever style that might be, they do need to invest in some type of different cultured practice, preferably a more yin-oriented practice to balance that which they do in the guan or in the dojo. And the same is true for the world of medicine in general and specifically of traditional Chinese medicine. I have found that traditional Chinese medicine colleges, and I wouldn't like to generalize it, certainly probably not all of them, but a lot of them have what we might term in modern culture toxic femininity. And I don't mean it in the sense of feminism versus chauvinism. That's not what I'm talking about. I'm speaking of an overt inclination towards the yin. It's all about love and softness and acceptance and just containing the pain of patients. But, you can't manage being a fully fledged practitioner of medicine with that attitude alone. I have an example just from recent times. I knew somebody who's depressed, and while it is true that with many people who are depressed, you have to be very soft and kind and sensitive, and all of that is very important. But oftentimes, people who are depressed are playing a sort of a subconscious type of war with you, with them attempting to basically pull you into the darkness in which they dwell, into this dark pit in which they are, and you should be attempting to pull them out of the darkness and into the light. And I mean this in the most literal sense possible, because a depressed person truly requires himself or herself to be in the light in order to recover. They need sunlight. They need to be outside. They need to be moving. So you, being the yang element, as hopefully a person who is not depressed themselves, you need to pull them out. And in order to do so, you can't be yin, period. You can be yin in your base interaction with them so they would feel very comfortable with you. And that is quite important. But at the end of the day, you have to bring in that yang force to counter that yin, which is depression. All depression is an expression of yin. So going back with martial arts, I think that we have the opposite problem in martial arts. People are too much in their martial practice and they forget to off-balance it with some type of other different culture practice. And it could be writing, it could be music, it could be painting. It could be a type of dancing, which is a far cry from the way they do their martial arts. Mm-hmm. Could be cooking, could be gardening. Really, literally anything you can develop a gongfu in. It has depth and it has a more yin side to it, not an inside, but a yin side that can offset attempting to kill another person. So, so I wanted to kick off with that because this has been around me in recent times because I've been speaking with people in traditional Chinese medicine and they don't get it. Because they don't have this idea, ironically enough, right? Because Chinese medicine, it's all about yin and yang. It's all about the taiji, the balance.
Yeah.
But they don't have that concept of, hey, we need a practice outside of medicine to off-balance that yin-containing attitude of healing people. But isn't healing perfect? Well, it is wonderful, but it's not exactly balanced. I mean, it drains you. Drains you to be so yin, to just be giving and giving endlessly, unless you're cultivating a yang force, say with martial arts. You could do it otherwise, right? You could run marathons or whatnot. You can go climb mountains, but you should do something to offset that at medical practice. Anyway, I've been babbling long enough. I'd love to hear your opinions about it.
We just had Shifu Scott Rodell on, who's pretty famous and renowned for his Chinese swordsmanship. And he literally says the same thing. He literally gives the same advice to his students. He's like, listen, find something outside of martial arts that you love, whether it could be guitar playing. He's big into bonsai. And so, he does the bonsai. And on top of that, he just started throwing pottery because he wanted some really nice handmade pots for the bonsai that he was doing. So he found a second practice outside of his martial art to complement his martial art. Another thing too, we live here in hippy dippy Boulder, Colorado, and we have the Naropa Institute. I don't know if you're familiar with Naropa, Jonathan?
No, I am not. Please tell me about it.
So Naropa is the only accredited Buddhist college in the world. Oh. Meaning like if I was going to Regis, which is a Catholic college, and I was studying science, I could take those credits that I got at Naropa, and they would count over at Regis. So that's what it means by accredited. But for years, I don't know if it's still going. It's a master's program, but we had an outdoor psychiatric program at Naropa, and basically, like you're saying, they would have all their normal Western psychiatric treatments, but it would be on horseback, or it would be next to a stream, or it would be taking a hike in our mountains, things like that. So they were literally, like you're saying, in the sunshine, outdoors in the elements. And they found that they had so much better results and permanent results with their patients when they did the treatment out in a natural environment instead of maybe in a hospital with the fluorescent lights, or instead of maybe in somebody's, personal office that, has the books and the couch and things like that. That typical image of what we see when we think of psychology or psychiatric treatment. So
that makes a ton of sense for me. And I've been telling people for years, I've been practicing this myself and wrote about it in my books, that martial arts teachers should take their students to all different types of venues to practice. So we practice indoors and outdoors, on marble, on wood, on stone, on grass, on earth, on concrete. I think that this wide exposure to different types of terrain is beneficial for both the body and mind, and is very useful for martial artists to be able to use their art in real time under distress, because if you had never practiced while standing on a certain type of surface, say you've never practiced on a slippery surface, so that would be a bad idea to test it the first time when somebody is running at you trying to bash your head into the wall.
Mm.
Very much so. Very much so. Owen, did you have anything you wanted to add, my friend?
No, that all makes sense to me for sure. And I've heard sort of very similar concepts from a number of different teachers that I've had as well. So
you're just speaking the truth over there, Jonathan.
Yeah,
speaking the truth over there.
Nowadays it's simply difficult to convince people that they have to pursue more than one type of gongfu, because they're too busy, being on Instagram and such, that they have no time. People have no time, right?
Mm-hmm.
Absolutely. How, by the way, you've just moved back to Israel. What has it been, a year now?
A year and a half.
How are things going? You're getting...
Yeah, thank you for asking. I mean, everybody has basically lost their minds over what has been going on over the past 3 years. This has been a tremendous transition, not just for the whole of society, but also for the martial arts community. All of the teachers I know have lost students, and the majority of them have lost most of their students. The majority. Wow. So, people may have gone down from, say, someone had 100 students. It's not uncommon. They've gone down to anywhere between 10 and 30 students. And these are the lucky ones, because many people have closed down their schools. And, people have talked about the technical facets of it, people having stayed at home under government regulations and such. But I think there is an underlying current that people do not discuss, which is that there has been a very strong psychological shift in society. And many people have been psychologically broken. And because it's not a typical type of depression, and it's literally, it's a new thing, right? It's a post-COVID existential crisis, and we don't have a name for it, so we don't talk about it, but people still carry this.
Global depression.
But it's beyond depression. It's beyond depression, because people were suddenly pushed way, way beyond their comfort zone. Mm-hmm. And a lot of people reacted by saying, hey, that's interesting. I'm in a different place now. Let's change the way I do things. Let's change career. Let's change my job. Let's change the way I interact with others. Some people took it a very positive way. And unfortunately, the greater bulk of the population took it in a negative way. Yeah. Some just were phased for a few weeks and that's it. Others are still carrying the burden of that period we've all been through. And I think it's partially our duty as martial arts teachers to guide them back into reason and sanity. And that is not simple. That is, and maybe you'd like to share from your own experiences of how you dealt with students. I can tell you that my experience had been that people felt that they were not themselves anymore. They had to be reminded why are they doing martial arts, what is the value in it, and how it can help them integrate themselves into their core personality, because it was almost like an out-of-body experience, but not in the typical positive spiritual sense that people talk about, but rather that people were pushed out of their body in the sense of they lost the feeling of who they were. And fortunately, if they were practicing martial arts for long enough, then the martial arts contained for them the essence, part of the essence of who they were. So by helping them go back into the practice and rekindle the love that they had for the practice, it really helped them reintegrate their true selves back again. So this has been my observation. And certainly I have lost most of my students as well due to all of these chains of events. Also, the fact that, of course, I moved abroad for a period of slightly over 2 years, but certainly the COVID had a big role to play there. So please, by all means, share your own experiences.
I and Owen, I actually took a cue from him. Owen started doing some classes online and on Zoom. And it was enjoyable, but there's really only so much you could do. So I had some of my old students, and I actually had some old friends, Jonathan, that I hadn't talked to in 20 years reach out to me. So I felt pretty good. So there's about a group of 5 of us, and we would get together every couple of weeks, and we'd do a big Zoom meeting. I set up my Zoom account with the TV, and then I had the camera and the speakers and stuff like that. And then, you could see the little blocks like we are right now. And it was cool because I had a student that I'd had for just a year. I had a student that I'd had for 4 years. And then I had an old friend of mine that was actually one of my Mantis teachers. And we did Wing Chun in college together. And I hadn't trained or seen him in 20 years. And then I had a couple of other students. I've got a friend that he does Wing Chun, and he's an R&B artist. He does rap. But he's been studying Wing Chun since he was like 7 years old. And so we got together, and it was really good to be with these people. I will say for myself that I think that if I didn't have a practice, that I would have lost myself in that, because I had something to go to continually. And, I love my Wing Chun. I love my Xingyi. And I kind of have a different mindset on how I train each of those arts. So it was like I put on a different robe or outfit or mindset or idea every time I was working on my personal practice, whether it be the Wing Chun, whether it be the Xingyi. And I think a lot of people didn't have something like that they were grounded in, like a repetition or a practice. And I think that's one thing that not enough martial artists look at is you need to look at it as a practice, as a lifelong process of learning and growing. And I think that's something that we haven't been able to convey enough from the Chinese martial arts world, at least in my opinion.
I think you're absolutely right. This is something that I've seen karateka understand. Even people who are not a sensei, who are not even black belts, they sort of get it. Oh, karate is a way of life. Maybe they've seen it enough in the movies, so they sort of get it. With Chinese martial arts, how long would it take me to get this and that degree? As if, they're attending a college or university.
Or that form. I want that sword form. I want that unarmed form. I want that 2-man form. Like we're at like a Chinese restaurant. It's like, I'll take one from column A, one from column B, that kind of thing. It's wild. It's wild. How about yourself, O?
Yeah, I mean, that's a good question. I think that for me, COVID was a little challenging. I'm not a full-time teacher, so I have a small group of people that have been with me for a long time. So the only alternative that we really had once the lockdown started for COVID was to go online. And we did that, but like Randel was saying, and I'm sure you know as well, it has its limitations in terms of being able to really transmit good gongfu and information. So, it worked out as well as it could have for a while. And then, I'm glad we're back in person. We've been back in person for a little over a year now. And I think that more than anything really made the difference for me is being able to go back in person. And it really made me appreciate having the opportunity to teach in person and to learn in person. But in my personal practice, I really use the lockdown time as an opportunity to really work on my practice. I really went back to the basics, and I really started working my ass off basically. I had a really solid practice for about 2 years there.
Sorry about Ginger chiming in. Ginger is our elderly cat. She's 17 years old and a bit senile. So I would ask for the listeners' forgiveness for Ginger. Since we talked, we just mentioned, that with karate, people have a lot of films, movie films to rely on to build their sense of culture around the different styles of karate and the cultural vibe that comes from both Okinawa and Japan. And I think we do not have enough films as such in the English language. We have very few of them in English. Most of the kung fu flicks are from Hong Kong or China, and they only have English subtitles. But what I was looking at as Owen was speaking, I was trying to recall the name, and I found that film that I saw 2 years ago called The Paper Tigers. Have you seen it?
Yes, I love the movie. Yeah, I love that one. Very fun.
Yeah, so The Paper Tigers, I would highly recommend it. You could probably get it on Amazon, Netflix. It's a wonderful, wonderful kung fu flick full of traditional Chinese culture and ideas and idioms. And it really encapsulates a lot of how traditional Chinese martial arts were in the United States over the past few decades and how they are perceived nowadays. And I think The Paper Tigers, by the way, it came out in 2020. So it's a rather recent film. Is a wonderful film to show both students and to share with our colleagues that can demonstrate and illustrate the type of culture that we as Chinese martial arts teachers are about.
Very much so. Yeah, I liked it. It's on Netflix. It's a Netflix original. And I liked that it was a fine mix between classical culture, but there was also a good amount of comedy in it as well. And it's very much a good movie about brotherhood as well. And I know that you kind of wanted to talk about that a little bit today, the camaraderie and that brotherhood that you can find in the Chinese martial arts. That was something when Neil was our second guest on the show, and he talked a lot about that towards the end. He's like, listen, we are practicing arts that are dying, not only in the West, but in their birthplace. And at some point, forget what style somebody else does. Try to talk to them. Try to learn from them. Even if you're not learning the physical skill of it, maybe you can learn how people teach, how people train, how people coach. Maybe you can get some ideas from each other. And that camaraderie seems to be stymied or stifled a lot. Some of the, one of my styles, as one of your core styles, is a Southern art. And yes. One of my favorite things that you ever said, I think it was on your interview over at the Plum Drag Herbs podcast, that you said you thought there was politics in Wing Chun until you had gotten into Southern Mantis. And I get it. I get that. I get that. I did Pak Mei for a couple of years, and I still practice the forms because they're fun. They're unique. I only have a few of them, but it was the same thing in Pak Mei. It's like, only my teacher taught it right, and only this guy does it right. And we don't like the Choi Li Foot guys, and we don't like the Wing Chun guys, and we don't like these people. And I'm like, who do you get along with? Because you guys actually have rivalries in your own damn school. I'm like, this is not healthy. And I don't really think that this kind of idea existed in China even. I think it's something that's been overblown with movies, with storytelling after generation of storytelling. We call it the Uncle Bob's fishing story out of Wyoming. The fish he caught was really this big, but by the time Uncle Bob is done telling that story, that fish is the largest recorded fish out of that reservoir, and it's 6 feet long, and it's a 80-pound fish. There's a ridiculousness that has been carried over, that at this point in time where these arts are dying, and where things like MMA, where other things like Sanda or Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu or kickboxing have become so popular, we're going to have to start talking to each other and having conversations and be okay with not coming to the same conclusion maybe, but still respecting each other, because maybe that conclusion came from 25 years to 50 years of personal experience through your lens on how you practice this art. So I guess, I don't know if that made any sense, or that was a little long-winded interjection, Jonathan.
Oh, sure. There are a lot of things that can be said here. So we've been basically in the world of traditional Chinese martial arts. I think we've been riding the Bruce Lee wave of popularity, and that wave has finally been dying down because Bruce Lee was at the top of its hype, and the Bruce Lee phenomenon in the 70s and 80s, and then in certain countries like Israel, that was in the 90s, because these movies arrived a little bit later into the culture. I mean, people don't know this, but until like the early 1990s, Israel only had one TV channel. It was that backwards in terms of, its relationship with modern media. Now, Israel has been an advanced country in other respects, but, it was founded as a semi-socialist country. And so the government was in control of a lot of things, and then was giving it up starting in the 80s, and they were transitioning into capitalism, and the mass media only became more capitalist oriented in the 90s. So a lot of the popular films and TV shows, it only caught up in Israel in the 90s, which were previously popular in the States in the 60s, 70s, and 80s. So in Israel, the Chinese martial arts teachers had their day in the 90s and early 2000s, actually. So a bit later. But the Bruce Lee thing has been dying out because the people who were young enough when they were watching the Bruce Lee flicks are now often too old, or at least too old in their view and understanding, to come to practice. And the younger generation grew up, with Fast and Furious 7.6 and 8.9, and they're interested in different types of flicks, and the action films of today are not the same as, the Stallone and Schwarzenegger flicks of the 70s, 80s, and 90s. And people have a different mindset about, what makes for action. And the BJJ, it's not just the Gracies, but there's a whole lot around the BJJ phenomenon that, kept on happening behind the scenes. Like BJJ sort of infiltrated, I don't think consciously, just happened culturally, infiltrated a lot of the behind the scenes Hollywood film martial arts scene choreography. And then suddenly you have BJJ. Like, I was watching the newest Avatar film, not the Avatar, The Last Airbender, but the Avatar Blue Aliens films by James Cameron, right? So, and there's they do BJJ underwater.
Right.
And that was kind of strange. There's aliens doing BJJ, but I was like, okay, but BJJ is everywhere nowadays. And the Chinese martial arts people, haven't really been pushing themselves into, or let's just say, I think there are a lot of Chinese martial arts people in Hollywood, but they've made their stuff just over the top ridiculous to make it fanciful and flashy for the audiences, whilst the BJJ and boxing choreography kept its roots. So the BJJ and the boxing and the Muay Thai actually looks mostly or exactly like what you'd find in the gyms, whilst the Chinese martial arts looks like modern wushu.
Right.
And people realize, I can't pull that crap off, in real life. Even if they don't have martial arts experience, they realize that's too much. That's an interesting observation. That's almost a reverse engineering of why you should have some classical Chinese martial arts on big screen, because somebody might see something and be like, I think I could do that with some training. But yeah, you see the 360 tornado kicks into an instant sweep and other things like that. And then the striking of the poses,
I understand that it's supposed to be for show, but yeah, I always joke and I always say, Sammo Hung's my spirit animal, my guy to be, because he's that chubby and he can do all those cartwheels. That being said, Owen and I actually had an episode similar about this, because we talked about the Shaw Brothers generation and the Golden Harvest generation, the older Hong Kong films. Most of those actors were actually legitimate martial artists. Mm-hmm. And now they're either dancers or they're stunt people that do a stunt version of martial arts for the cinema. And so I actually preferred the older Hong Kong stuff, because you could see like a genuine, like thrown punch with genuine power, even though it was wushuized for the film. You could actually see some proper body mechanics. You could see real alignment. You could see real force, even though, the punches were pulled, things like that. And now it's just gymnastics. There's nothing tangible. There's nothing real about what you're seeing on screen, except for entertainment, maybe.
Exactly. That is what I wanted to get at. You got ahead of me. The martial arts choreographers in the age of the Shaw Brothers and the Golden Harvest, they had the understanding that they needed a certain tempo and they needed a certain speed in order to illustrate and demonstrate to the audience how those martial arts work. And although it was fast and it was flowing, it was still slow enough and sharp enough for the audience's eyes to be able to witness and comprehend roughly what was going on in a way that made them believe that this was possible. Mm. However, aside from that, we've had a problematic phenomenon, and this is quite controversial. I got a lot of flack for talking about this. In China, the MMA is quite big right now. Yeah. And the MMA is always involved with a lot of money. And there has been a sort of a business conspiracy, or I would say a business plan to get MMA into China. And there have been various people involved with this. I wouldn't want to name any names. But in order to get MMA into China, they had to make the case that MMA was something that the Chinese people have to desire. And it wasn't that difficult, because the Chinese people, the young generation of Chinese people, are still affected by the Chairman Deng Xiaoping, who said, I think it was in the early 90s or late 80s, that he said that when the Chinese government decided that they want to transition more into capitalism, suddenly the chairman went on camera and said, becoming rich is glorious. Now that blew the minds of the Chinese people. They're like, they've been told since 1949 when the communists took over, like, money is evil, right? We kill people who hoard too much assets or money. And the Chinese were, for thousands of years, they were quite businesslike. So, this communism didn't come naturally to them. And suddenly the Chairman says, getting rich is glorious? Amazing. That's fantastic news. And everybody went for it, and as a cultural byproduct to this day, you see the younger generation, they are more and more attracted to whichever opportunities from Western culture might aid them in becoming richer, more abundant. And they see the connection. They feel as if, since capitalism, of course, the Chinese had capitalism.
Right.
They had an imperial system, but within it, they had capitalism. It wasn't exactly like the feudal system of the Middle Ages in Europe. It was rather different, because the empire was so vast that they didn't really have the resources to oversee everything that was going on there. So instead of trying to do that, a lot of people were just doing, whatever they desired, as long as they paid enough taxes and paid lip service to whichever thing the empire was into. Like when the Manchus took over, they decided that everybody are going to shave the front of their heads and wear long queues. Whether old men have to do that, and it's punishable by death if you don't do that. And so, that's ridiculous. But if you did that, the empire wasn't at your heels. It's like, yeah, well, you wear clothes, you wear a hairstyle, you bow down to the imperial officials, you pay your taxes, do whatever. We can't get to your village any day anyway. We come once a year, once every 5 years or so, and people, most places, unless you lived in a big city, you basically did what you wanted. And they had the sort of like free market capitalism. And so, and now, of course, people were scared. People didn't really do whatever they wanted, because if you were caught, they had some really, really evil, harsh punishments. But nonetheless, it was like a wink, get along with what the empire says, and you could sort of do your thing. Which, funny enough, is similar to the model of the empire in Star Wars. Because if you read between the lines, if you just do what we tell you, you can do whatever.
Have the money. Have the money when we come into town.
Yeah, and maybe your planet is in the way and you're going to blow that up. But aside from that, so
that's right.
Anyway, going back to the Chinese and everything. So when I was living in China, I lived on and off in China for 6 months of my life, and I was primarily in Tianjin, which is a big city. It was 15.5 million people. When I was there last in 2014, it's probably nearly 20 million people nowadays. And I saw the youngsters eating at McDonald's and KFC, and I was thinking, like, what the hell are you doing? There are 10 restaurants on any given street, and this is amazing Chinese food. Why are you going to that McDonald's for amazing, nutritious, delicious, traditional food? It's much better than the McDonald's and the KFC. But nonetheless, they went for it because it's Western. And I also remember one time, if you've ever had, you probably had mooncakes, right?
Yes.
So not all listeners know what mooncakes are. There's something in between, like cookies and cakes. It's a bit difficult to describe, but think about little pudgy, semi-hard cakes. They're really great, and there are many types of them. So in the morning, I think it was probably like 6 a.m. I was driving on my bicycle to the park. It was an hour drive, and I stopped at the bakery and filled a whole bag with mooncakes, freshly baked mooncakes. These are delicious, and they smell great, and they're probably not good for you, but nonetheless, they are delicious and smell great. So I took them to the park, and, we're going to be, like, I was driving an hour on the bicycle and then would be training for 3 hours and then driving an hour back. You had to eat something. So, and I had gongfu brothers and my teacher, Zhou Shigong, my Shigong teacher's teacher, Master Zhou. He was teaching at Xigu Park in Tianjin. So I brought the bag with the mooncakes, and after, I don't know, like an hour and a half, 2 hours of training, people were resting. I was offering the mooncakes to my Kung Fu brothers, Master Zhou, and everybody, and nobody took a mooncake. And I was surprised, like, why wouldn't they eat the mooncakes? They're hungry, obviously. I've been training hard. And then, I tried to give them, since I was left with a lot of mooncakes, and I can't really eat all of them. So I tried to give them to some other Chinese people that I knew that were in the living quarters where I resided and other places. And I saw that the youngsters that I knew, I didn't know too many older Chinese people, none of the youngsters would take it. People like in their 20s and 30s. So maybe 2 days later, I went on a friendly restaurant date with 2 female Chinese friends. And I asked them, why is it that people don't like the mooncakes and they also go and eat at the KFC and the McDonald's? And they told me, the younger generation, we want new things. We don't like the old things. I was like, what? What do you mean? It's old thing tasty. Can't you get the equation? But no, it's a thing that comes down way back from Mao Zedong, because Mao Zedong was basically against old culture. Mm-hmm. And that is a Marxist idea, actually. So Marx, I have a sort of a love-hate relationship with Karl Marx. I'm not a Marxist by any stretch of the imagination. And I think Marx has done a tremendous job at describing the negative facets of capitalism. He does a great job at that. Now, I don't agree with any of his conclusions about what should be done about it, but his analysis is very good. But one of the things that Marx thought should be done, which I'm not in agreement with, he was saying, and by the way, if you're listening to this, and especially if you're an American, go read what the man actually wrote and not what is being said on the news media. Not because you should be a communist. I don't think that communism is a bad idea. Just he has some of the best critique of capitalism that there is, what should be fixed, and it's good. So anyway, he was saying, that you should basically demolish old culture to bring in a new culture. Of course, he didn't call it a Marxist culture. He called it a socialist culture. So Mao Zedong, who copied a little bit of what Marx was into and what Marx was writing, was telling his Chinese people, hey, we are not for old culture. We're going to reject old culture. Unlike what people say, they didn't actually persecute the Chinese martial arts too much. They persecuted the Chinese martial artists. So a lot of teachers were politically affiliated, and they were persecuted because of their political beliefs or affiliations, because they stood for what was good, and what was good was not the communism. And that was the problem. And so, a lot of people nowadays, unfortunately from certain Taiwanese lineages, they say, all the masters died out on the mainland, or they killed all the masters, and that is other horse crap, and is not true. But what happened was that a lot of them, they sort of went semi-underground. It's not that they hid the fact that they were martial artists, but they would practice and teach late at night, or they would practice in closed courtyards, or they would practice outdoors in the parks, but they wouldn't show any martial things at the park. They would only teach the movements, and they would solely instruct on how to use them behind closed doors. That sort of thing. I think by the mid-1980s, that was changing. By the mid-1980s, they were already out and about, certainly in Chen Village.
Right. Yep.
And so what happened was that the Chen Village is good. I mentioned it. The Chinese government has been heavily invested in the new Shaolin, which we can call Shaolin Disneyland. Which they poured millions in because they realized this brings a lot of tourists. And then later in the late 1980s, I think, and early 90s, they decided to also side with Chen Village because, and they took a political side there because they decided, okay, so Chen Village is the one and only source of Taiji Chuan, which is not entirely correct because there's actually several villages with similar arts like Jiaobao Village in the region, and they all sort of co-created different versions of the same thing. And maybe the Chen Village stuff was more widespread, but it's not exactly like these guys had the best thing or these guys had the only original thing. And also Chen Taiji, as shown in the research of our colleague Jarek Szymanski, who has this wonderful website, China from Inside. He has shown and demonstrated what is known today, that the Chen family martial arts are strongly influenced by Shaolin. And, the Chen Village is just a 3-hour car drive from the Northern Shaolin Temple. So that's not a long distance. Even by foot, that's not a long distance. The Chen family Taiji Chuan was originally a Shaolin art that got rounder and rounder and a bit softer and softer and changed over, some say, 13, 14 generations. Some say 20, 21, 22 generations. No matter how you count it, they changed it gradually from being Shaolin to what they have now, which is great. And the Chinese government became invested in that and in the modern Shaolin. The problem was then when the MMA people came in, They had to make an example that the Chinese martial arts were worthless so that the young people would go for the MMA, reject the old, and bring forth the new, like Mao Zedong said. But they had to make the case for it because MMA was not that well known in China, where they have the Great Firewall. So although people up until recent times, they sort of often bypassed the Great Firewall, it was not that difficult when I was in China, really not that difficult. You could have like a simple VPN and, surf abroad to almost any website. Nowadays, it's more difficult because they have this social credit system. And if you do something the government doesn't like, they'll lower your ranking, and suddenly you can't fly on planes, you can't take trains, they might fire you from your job. It's the worst tyranny on earth right now in China, unfortunately. And that's the government, not the people. So the MMA guys took this fella, Su Xiaodong. Su Xiaodong, it's written XU space XIAODONG, Su Xiaodong. And that guy, some people take him to be independent in that sense. I think he was also financed. That's disputed. But he's, at the time, I think he was around 40 years old. He's an MMA coach. He's skilled at what he does. Nobody disputes that. He knows how to fight. He's not a competitor. He started trash talking with all sorts of phonies online that claim that they're Tai Chi masters and all that nonsense. People who really belong in a mental asylum. People who are just crazy. And they're basically all trolling each other. And he's like, I can do this and this to you without touching you. And he's like, come and show me, we're going to meet, we're going to have a fight, blah, blah, blah. And then they set it all up, and he beat up two of these phonies, and then he beat up somebody who claimed he's from the Yip Man lineage. Maybe he is, but his Wing Chun wasn't so good, and he couldn't stand to Su Xiaodong, and he also got beat up. So there are two quote-unquote fights against people who are basically insane. They're totally deluded, who could not fight their way out of a paper bag, couldn't do anything. Mm-hmm. Then there was a Su Xiaodong fight, which he won rather easily against this guy who I think it was a Wing Chun guy who just wasn't so skilled. And it's okay. I mean, but these fights were set up. Su Xiaodong, he chose his opponents to be people he knew he could beat up easily. It wasn't evenly matched. It wasn't really well sanctioned. At least the first two fights were literally just random places, and people picked up a camera, and it was ridiculous. It was over in seconds. So later, rumors have it that he was beat up. I don't know if that's true. I certainly saw a video where some people from Chen Village, or on behalf of Chen Village, came and challenged him in a hotel lobby. He was coming out of the hotel. Excuse me. And they were telling him, like, let's do it outside, here and there. And he's like, no, we have to schedule, we have to prepare. He was finding excuses. He had an entourage. They had an entourage. It was heated up. I think the police stopped it outside. So I think that did not end up with an actual fight. But there are a lot of people who sought to defend the honor of traditional Chinese martial arts, who wanted to fight Su Xiaodong. He never agreed to have any of these fights. So, excuse me. I'm not saying that he had to. I'm just saying the fights that he did have were not difficult for him at all. And that was it. And then there had been a few other people, maybe similar in agenda to Su Xiaodong. Maybe they did not have an agenda. I don't know. There are at least 3 or 4 or 5 other fights like that became widespreadly popularized in China until the government basically came down on this, because the government is invested in Chen Village, and the government couldn't approve, of Tai Chi Chuan being humiliated in that way. They didn't like it. So the government basically said, anybody who's going to do something like this that's not sanctioned, it doesn't have a government authorization, is going to get in deep trouble. And Su Xiaodong was also arrested for a while, and I think his gym was closed for a short while. Yep. So he got the clue. He stopped that. But the message already came across. People realized, hey, this MMA thing has got something that's supposedly better than our traditional Chinese martial arts. And that is how MMA and BJJ caught on so well in China now. Now, also, people must understand, I'm trying to be neutral here with Su Xiaodong, right? Because I'm saying the person has skill. He's a legit MMA coach. I don't like him personally, his personality, what he did. But that's aside the point, and Su Xiaodong was also reacting. He was reacting to a whole lot of phonies. We're talking thousands and thousands of videos of, again, either just pure charlatans who are out for fame or money, or just mentally ill people who sought to make a name for themselves by promoting nonsense on the Chinese equivalents of YouTube. There are several of these. And these people, removing individuals from afar without touching them in ridiculous ways, without having any
magical powers.
Exactly. And there were also reality shows where they faked all sorts of skills. Yep. And the Chen village people, some of the younger generation were involved in reality shows where they had quote unquote, sparring matches without strikes. It was all wrestling, but essentially, to the best of my knowledge, most, if not all of it, was staged to some degree. And so somebody like Su Xiaodong was fed up with that, and a lot of Chinese people were fed up with that. So that's the background to how, MMA and BJJ got to be so popular in China, and a lot of MMA and BJJ gyms have opened in major cities, especially in Tianjin, Beijing, and Shanghai. Probably in many other places as well. I'm just not familiar with it. And it's a big phenomenon in China right now. And also in the West, we suffered from it because, these videos the Su Xiaodong videos were eventually circulated everywhere by the mass media, even in Israel. Suddenly, some months later, maybe 6 months, 12 months later, I would see the news media here in Israel suddenly featuring those Su Xiaodong videos and like, oh, look at the Tai Chi being beat up. Ha, Tai Chi is worthless. Some random news anchor who doesn't know what the fuck they're saying,
Right.
So that gave a bad name to Chinese martial arts everywhere. And I think a lot of Chinese martial arts teachers who don't know about this whole thing that went on that I was just talking about do not realize that this affected their school and this affected their business.
We have some interesting parallels like that, even locally. Here in the United States, especially in Colorado. Colorado's kind of weird. I'm going to say this on the high end, Jonathan. I would say that there's maybe on a good day, 30 Chinese martial arts schools across all of Colorado. And we have great BJJ anywhere you turn here. You've got great Western boxing. There's a lot of competitors in the MMA world. One, because Colorado is such a high altitude. And so they use that in their fights. They will train at altitude. And that's part of it is the cardio and the conditioning, things like that. But what also happens is, like you're saying, people will watch stuff on TV. Now, that's not going to affect Owen and I. Like, we'll watch Su Xiaodong do these fights. That's not going to stop me from doing Wing Chun. It's not going to stop me from doing Xingyi. I have a pretty knowledgeable and pragmatic use of these systems, but I also understand that, yes, I can defend myself, but can I defend myself with everything? No. I cross-train with people. I cross-train with people in Filipino martial arts, Indonesian knife fighting, all different kinds of things to get different viewpoints. But I think with what you're saying is that might keep someone in a younger generation, some 12-year-old, some 15-year-old that was thinking maybe about going to maybe a Shaolin school down the street, but instead they see the Su Xiaodong fight and they're like, okay, I know a boxing school that's even better. I'm just going to go to that. Why would I waste my time with Chinese martial arts, especially since it's going to take me forever to get anywhere, to be anywhere and for competency. I mean, I don't know. Just some food for thought.
I have two comments on this, which I think are important. First of all, look at how in BJJ and Muay Thai and MMA, they are not afraid of insurance trouble and of legal trouble. Now, that is to their detriment, because I know for a fact that in most BJJ schools, there is an over 90% injury rate. And I'm talking not a black eye, I'm talking serious injuries, lifelong injuries. In some BJJ and MMA schools, it's 100% injury rate. And that is excessive. That is very excessive. However, they are on the other end of the scale. From us Chinese martial arts teachers, a lot of us are so dead afraid of legal trouble that we don't push ourselves and our students in practice to do more dangerous things. And so that is less attractive to the younger generation, because young people want action. Especially the men, they want action. They want it to be realistic. Now, do you have to choke somebody else out in training? Personally, I don't think so. You should bring them close. And the only reason that I would not choke somebody unconscious and do so of my own volition, accidents happen, is simply because when you choke somebody unconscious, the cumulative brain damage is there. Always. It's like a knockout. Every time you're knocked out, there's cumulative brain damage. And every time you're fully choked out, there's cumulative brain damage. And in terms of realism, you get choked out, you're out. You're out anyway. So I don't think that's necessary, but getting them close to it, yeah, I get my students close. I routinely show my students how to break a neck, and they very slowly bring one another close to it so they understand, how to break other limbs, how to choke somebody, how to dislocate a windpipe, which is something that Chinese martial arts people seldom demonstrate nowadays, how to dislocate a shoulder, etc. You can get quite close. People should be able to feel it. A lot of teachers are afraid of showing things like that nowadays. Younger people desire to get close to the fire because they are fiery. And that makes a lot of sense. And I think it's partly because the BJJ and MMA gyms and the Muay Thai gyms get people a realistic sort of action. Not necessarily realistic in the sense that it's going to be like that on the street, but realistic in the sense of it's very close to injury. That piques the interest of a lot of young people. And the other facet is, Randel talked earlier about community, right? And I think in BJJ there is a strong sense of male camaraderie, where they put their fingers like that, right? The fingers, hey, we're all cool, we're all wearing this gear, yeah, buy this gear. It's not traditional Chinese shirts from 200 years ago. No, that's like his gear, and we're all wearing brands on our gear, like we're NASCARs, right?
Right.
Which I personally find ridiculous, but to each his own. But it's brands, so they can wear brands like a woman wears brands, but it's manly, so they can do that. That's attractive. So there's this whole gear thing that, like, the fact that it's basically the equivalent of shoes or jewelry for men. This whole buying the gear, whether it's gi or no gi, you have your gear and the things you buy, and even the camaraderie about, oh, I got this jock itch. You also got that jock itch. What do you do for the jock itch? It's like a manly thing, like women talk about their period, or I got this neck injury. I got this back injury. I got this knee injury. We're all injured together. Who do you go to see your injury? Where I go to see Jonathan Bluestein. Excellent. That's excellent for my Chinese medicine practice. I mean, you all go to practice BJJ. I might not get you as students, but I'm certainly getting you as patients. So It's a win-win for me. Win-win for me. But I'm saying there's this whole thing, essentially, BJJ almost everywhere. It's in some of the MMA gyms too, but mostly BJJ is a men's club, is a chain of men's clubs. That's what it is. Now, if you're not, and men's clubs have been around in every generation, and the Freemasons, aside from being a religion, and I don't make this up, they call themselves Masonic religion. It's the name, right? Freemasonry, for the most part, is a man's club. People go to Freemasonry because it's a man's club, right? And likewise, BJJ is a men's club. It's a chain of men's clubs. Like women go to the saloon, do their nails. That's their women's club. And men, they used to have the study, but now they have BJJ. And goes back to Greek times, right? They would box, they would wrestle, and then they would massage each other. By the way, it's an excellent idea. We are so afraid of sexuality that one man cannot massage another man nowadays. And I gotta tell you, first time I ever started getting massages which were not by my female partners, either men or women, was when I started my Chinese medicine studies. Because the man, I'm telling you, I felt uncomfortable getting or giving massages, which is ridiculous. But that's the type of culture and environment that I grew up in as a man. And, actually, if the BJJ people, if you're listening in on this, bring in massage at the end of the BJJ classes, you'd have double the students. It's massage, but it's not gay. So everybody, you gotta get double the students, right? I have nothing against, some of my best friends are gay. And so it's not a statement against gay people, of course, and massage is not straight or gay, and I do massage. I do Tuina, Chinese medical massage, and do it regularly for a living. So anyway, the BJJ, being a men's club, is something that we've forgotten about in traditional Chinese martial arts. Often we're too busy with the politics and we forget about the society, the culture, the community, right? So this is something I've been writing a lot about in one of my books, The Martial Arts Teacher, and then the second edition, The Martial Arts Teacher 2. The martial arts school is a community. Now, unfortunately, a community is not something, sometimes it happens organically and you'd be lucky for that to happen to you. But if you want a community, you have to encourage it. And I think one of the best martial arts books that I ever read is a short book called Success is Waiting. Success is Waiting by Buzz Durkin Sensei. And I actually know two of the most successful martial arts teachers who have ever lived in the West, at least. So one is Grandmaster Keith Kelspecht from Germany. He's actually from Europe because he travels and lives all over Europe. His organization, at its peak, would have 60,000 students. And that's a Wing Chun organization. But aside from my friend Keith, there's another fellow, this guy who wrote this book, Success is Waiting, Buzz Durkin Sensei. He's up there in Vermont, is it? Or New Hampshire? I think, yeah, he's in New Hampshire, I think. And he lives in a town with just under 5,000 people. Mm-hmm. And in that town of just under 5,000 people, half those people are members of his dojo. And wow. That is insane. I think, actually, he is the most successful martial arts teacher who has ever lived in the West. It's impossible to do. You got the grandpas and the grandmas with their children and grandchildren in his dojo.
Huh, that's great.
What is that?
That's great.
Yeah, right?
And if you read his book, Success is Waiting, you know how he did it. Because he is just a lovely human being. He's personable. Mm-hmm. He's kind. He's wonderful. He really cares about people. Whenever somebody has a birthday, he would write them a birthday note. Every day, because he has so many students, every day he has the list of birthdays. And he would sit in his office and write personal birthday notes for every single person that has a birthday and write something nice to them. Put it in an envelope and mail it to them in advance to arrive on their birthday. Who does that in martial arts? And right. That's why it has so many students. And I took it to heart, by the way. We have a WhatsApp group. I've been doing this for years. Every time a student has a birthday, and thank Evil Zuckerberg for Facebook so I can know when people's birthdays are. And so I said, every time I see a student's birthday on Facebook, I check every day. Then I would record a message sometimes it'd be maybe 30 seconds. At times I would go up to 4 or 5 minutes, congratulating the person and just sharing my honest, good thoughts about the positive aspects regarding that person and how he is developed within our schools and community. That is so very important. That creates a sense of community. That's all ensures, hopefully, that over time, the students would take the Shifu's birthday more seriously. So it's a two-way street, right? Mm-hmm. We have to show respect to gain respect. We got to give trust to gain trust. So we have to do that as martial arts teachers. And let me reiterate that. This is very important. Show respect to gain respect. Give trust to gain trust. People forget that. For instance, martial arts teachers, they would want the students to trust them, but then they would never trust the student. They would keep all the authority to themselves. They would never trust the student to leave him with a group of students and go on vacation for him to teach under them. Mm-hmm. Some teachers do that too much, and then the students feel abused. You get all the monthly fees, and we get nothing, and we teach for you all the time. That's the opposite, and some teachers do that. Other teachers go the other extreme. They never allow students to teach under them. No, if you want to teach, open your own school. You can't teach under me. You're not good enough. Well, you have to give trust to gain trust. And you have to give respect to gain respect. So you have to really not just show respect to students, but you have to tell them that you respect them, and preferably tell them that you respect them, and do so in front of other students. So the other students witness how you give respect and you give trust. That is very important. For example, one difficulty that I had some years back, when me and my wife moved abroad for a while, and I left one of my groups in one of the cities under a student who's rather young. He's just 21 years old. But amongst the students who were left in that city, he was the most charismatic. He wasn't the most veteran student. And he was not yet skilled enough, knowledgeable enough for me to call him a Shifu. But I sort of left him in charge of the group. So I said, he's a group leader, as you called in the United States.
Mm-hmm. Yes.
Unfortunately, that did not work out as well as I'd hoped. Some students, the students would come. Some would not respect him enough. I mean, he would run the class, yes, but they did not show him enough respect. And some of the other students, he actually brought in new students, but then these students didn't stick around once I came back, and he handed me back the group of his own volition, happily handed me back the group. And then these newer students didn't come to study under me for that and various other reasons. And I think much of it is my fault, because I did not show him enough respect in front of other students, and I did not endow him with the trust in front of other students. Although they were told, of course, that he is in charge of the group and this and that, but I didn't do all those things publicly enough times, and then this caused a lot of problems. So this is my bad experiences being conveyed to listeners. Hopefully, as martial arts teachers, you do better than I, and then that I would remember this and do better in the future myself.
We have all ran into brick walls as teachers, things that, you look back 5 or 10 years ago and it's like, why the hell did I do that? But I think just like our martial practice, the teaching is a practice in and of itself. And sometimes just because you're a great martial artist doesn't mean you're going to be a great teacher, unless you're willing to humble yourself to learn along the way, just like you're learning along the way as a martial artist. If you think you've got it, the minute you learn the system, it's like, okay, now you teach. If you think you got it and you're crystallized as a teacher, well, anything that's crystalline breaks, so if you are set in stone and you're set in your ways and you're not willing to learn and adapt, you might not have many students or any on the road as a teacher,
Mm-hmm. Yeah, you can be a great teacher in some respects and a terrible teacher in others. I can tell you with all honesty that I have always technically been a good teacher. Technically meaning that if I had to instruct on a movement or a technique or make a person understand what it is that they're doing, I've always been great at that. but certainly not nearly as good in the human relations department. Actually, I sucked at it in the beginning. Mostly that is my own fault, but also as I did not really have my own teachers instruct me on how to do such things, partially because they had a much smaller group. They had much smaller groups of students, and the students were very like-minded in certain respects. So there weren't any challenges pertaining to human relations to resolve with very few people and all being quite like-minded and all into the thing that they're already doing. So you didn't actually have to manage a community. So nobody ever taught me how to be a communal leader. I was taught how to teach the physical art well. Neither was I ever taught about how to convey the spiritual aspects of what we do, which has been a separate journey for me. And certainly the study of Chinese philosophy and of traditional Chinese medicine has helped tremendously with that. But it is in part, for example, my dear teacher, Shifu is my Xingyi teacher, whom I really love and I consider as family. He's not that much of a spiritual person. So, he doesn't believe in the existence of, human spirit or spirits. And even though he's a Chinese medicine doctor, he just conceives of things differently. So for me, as someone who does believe in things as such, though I'm very spiritual, I'm not quite religious, but quite spiritual, to teach the arts in a way that reflects these beliefs of mine, also without coercing such beliefs on people, or just rather presenting them off my point of view, has been a challenge for the years.
That's good. Wow. So that's been a big change coming onto the show. And before we brought you on the show, you and I talked via Facebook about some things and topics that you wanted to talk about. And one of the biggest things that you were talking about, Jonathan, was how you've transitioned as a teacher. And you've talked about the social skills of teaching and the social skills of being a teacher and learning to be a communal leader. If it's not too big of a switch of gears, can I ask you, what are some of the technical things that you've changed? Because I went back and I read the Blue Jade. I wouldn't call it a business statement, but I was super interested because you have something called, and I'm going to mispronounce this. You can help me out here. Tong Bu Dao.
Tong Bu Dao, yes.
Tong Bu Dao. The way of synchronicity. Is that correct, my friend?
Yes, that is what I teach nowadays. The amalgamation into a coherent curriculum of the martial arts I've studied and I'm still studying, actually, because it is very important to also to always continually have teachers like T.T. Liang. If someone has read his fantastic book, one of the best books.
Steal My Art.
Yes, Steal My Art. Not still like,
that's a good one.
It's right now my art. Still is like, take from me, thieve from me, steal my art. By T.T. Liang. He was a Taiji guy who was studying Northern Praying Mantis in his 70s and 80s. Amazing guy.
Yes, absolutely. So let's see. Let me see if I can remember this. Pigua, Xingyi, Juklum or Southern Mantis.
Juklum, Southern Mantis, yeah.
And then in a few years ago, you recently started Bagua.
There's a little bit of Bagua Zhang, not a lot, a little of Bagua Zhang, and currently heavily into Li family system. And there are a lot of Li family systems. There are a lot of Li families teaching martial arts. There's a Li family that has taught Southern Shaolin. They're very interesting. Very interesting type of Southern Shaolin. Yeah.
Is it Ligar?
No, it's not Ligar. Ligar is literally like in Cantonese that would be a Li family, right?
Right.
Li family Fist is one name, but it's not the same Li family. No. Okay. This is. I'll talk about that group of styles under Li family that I'm studying in a moment. I'll get to it.
Okay.
Before we get to Tongbuddha, I just want to bring another example regarding my development, as a communal leader, which I think is very important. One of my pivotal moments, I remember, so a few years back, I had a student who was very inspiring for me for many years. He was my student for 7-8 years. His name is Yechiel Leshman. He's a CEO of a very large company here in Israel, which I didn't know for the first year when I taught him. And he started when he was 66 years old.
Wow.
Yeah.
That's awesome.
Very, very interesting fella. And, he was with me a long time. And I remember distinctly, so some years ago, before I moved abroad, it was a spring day and it started raining and we were at the park. So there was a certain awning made from climbing vines that all of my students were running towards. It was about 100 meters from where we were training. So they all ran to it. And it started just pouring rain. Now, I also sort of, I was jogging. I didn't run to it, but I was jogging casually because I'm not of those folks who think that you should run away from the rain. That's just a bit too much. And not to show that I didn't want to show the students that you should be hysterical about it. But then as I arrived at that awning made from climbing vines, I looked back and Yechiel was there. He was just a third of the way because he was an older gentleman in his 70s and he couldn't jog or run like everybody else. He's a bit overweight. And so I walked back to him and then walked with him. But and the students, they didn't see that, not consciously. But personally, I felt very bad about this incident. I felt that I was leading them on the path whilst leaving at the time the person who is in that context the weakest link behind. And I should have been walking at his pace behind him. And that is a lesson I learned, but that is an impression that I left with my students that I could not correct, in my opinion. Even though nobody commented on it, I don't think anybody consciously thought about this like I did, but I thought it was a bad personal example. And as I write in my book, The Martial Arts Teacher, and then The Martial Arts Teacher 2, you need to set a personal example which is almost saintly. Now, you cannot be a saint, but at least appear saintly while you're in front of your students. That is very important. I have one of my dear teachers, Shifu Sapir Tal, a disciple of late Grand Master Henry Pui, who taught me Jukum Southern Mantis, that is Shifu Sapir. He stopped smoking because he said, I couldn't see myself standing next to little kids who come to class and they see me smoking. That's such a terrible example.
Yeah.
And that prompted him to stop smoking. And he's very good, by the way, this man, Shifu Sapir, he's very good at setting up a personal example. I got to share a story here. That's, in my opinion, this story is more important than me talking about my martial arts. So at one time, there was a buddy of Shifu Sapir, Avinardiya Sensei, who's a grandmaster in his own right. Avinardiya Sensei is a famous teacher here in Israel, and he travels and does a lot of seminars abroad. And he came and he taught this Kapap seminar. Kapap is type of Krav Maga. And myself and some of my students were attending it, as well as all of many students, not all, but from my Shifu school. And there was a guy there he wasn't retarded, he wasn't autistic, but he was somewhat mentally challenged in some way, which I'm not sure of. He went through a very difficult car accident years back. Doctors didn't even think he would make it. Everything was broken in his body. And he recovered and he practiced martial arts for years and built himself. So he was kind of a bit strange guy, really nice guy, not a stupid person at all, but he was strange in his ways. And to build up that guy's confidence, Avi Sensei was adamant, like, I want somebody to come on and spar with this guy after, half the seminar or something. Now, Israelis can be a bit aggressive like that. Navi Sensei is an Israeli, and we are sometimes like this. And I thought, yeah, it's a bit overt, you know. But the guy was excited. The guy he wanted people to spar with, he was excited about this because he was doing Kyokushin karate, so he was doing a lot of sparring. But he wasn't very skilled, you know. He's like student level, you know, the guy. Earlier, just prior to that, we did this exercise where people were standing in a big circle. Somebody would be inside of the circle. Avi Sensei would tell somebody that they have to ram him. Now, you standing inside of the circle, you wouldn't know whom around you is going to ram you. And right when you turned your back, somebody would run at you, try to ram you to the ground, then apply a technique on you on the ground. It's like semi-sparring sort of situation. But the idea is you get caught by surprise. So when I was in the center of the circle, nobody could take me down except for that guy who really surprised me and took me down. Huh. And so when we were on the ground, in a matter of like 5 seconds, I was doing a rear naked choke on the guy. And he had such strong fighting spirit that he wouldn't give up. So I was choking and telling him, tap, please tap. And he wouldn't tap. The guy wouldn't tap. And the problem was he was so strong. Like if I were to let him go, he would jump me. So I also couldn't let him go. So I was choking. And just when he went like, I just had to let him go because I knew he was going to go unconscious. So I let him go. And I felt really bad with myself being a teacher that I couldn't mitigate this otherwise. I don't know if I could have, if I tried it again. This was just the spirit of the moment, you know, and that guy was just not going to stop. He's going to spar me to the ground, you know. That's what he was told to do. That's what he was doing. He's doing good on his part. It was a real fight. So later, when Avi Sensei asked people to come on and spar with the guy, and people saw what happened with me, they all felt uneasy. They all felt like, yeah, I don't know how this is going to turn out. And like, am I going to hurt him? They were thinking, I saw their heads spinning, you know, the gears in their heads working. Or, you know, is he going to humiliate me and I'm going to look bad? Nobody volunteered. And I couldn't volunteer because I just screwed up, you know, with this guy. I almost choked him out. And I didn't want to do it again. I felt so bad for the guy. So, by the way, I didn't even have to participate. I wanted to participate as a teacher, but, you know, the other teachers who were invited were sitting at the side, you know, gossiping, just looking at the event. I liked to be a student also. So Shifu Sapir, who was basically the guy who orchestrated the event and invited Avi Sensei, he saw that nobody was volunteering. He volunteered. At the time, he's still my Shifu, of course, but at the time I was studying under him. I don't no longer, but we are very good friends and he's a great teacher of mine, still a life teacher for me. And so that was one example. So he volunteered and he started sparring with this guy and they're sparring standing, not on the ground. Mm-hmm. And Shifu could kill him. He could kill him in 3 seconds, really. There's no match, but Shifu played with him like a kid would play with a puppy. He played with him so nice, and he let the guy roundhouse kick to his thighs, and really punch his chest hard. And he's like, "Yeah, you go, try this." And Shifu would like hit him, but he would really hit him too hard, and then the guy would get his chance. And he made this sparring match, which was, by the way, without gloves, any protective gear, right? And he made it look so honorable. Not just in front of everybody else, but so honorable for that other guy. So through that sparring match, he made the guy look so good. Really, for everybody involved. And you know, the students are just cheering, you know, and they're happy about the whole thing. I was sitting there almost crying. I was touched because as a teacher, I could see what was going on there. Because Shifu lowered his ego all the way down to the floor and was taking hits that hurt. The guy had power. Just to make that guy he didn't even know the guy before. He just wanted that person to be happy. He made him happy through fighting. Mm-hmm. And who can do that? So I felt, you know, this is one of those moments in my life where I felt, you know, I'm really humble here. You know, my Shifu did something I couldn't do. No, he could do a lot of things that I can't do physically, but he did something I couldn't do with another human being in terms of his heart-to-heart communication with that other person through martial arts. I thought it was one of the most impressive things I've ever seen in my life, period, not just in martial arts, the way he did that. And it's a moment that you can't even capture on video because without the whole context, without the cultural context, without knowing that guy, this guy, it's hard to understand. I thought it was incredible. So talk about growth, as a communal leader, that was a growing moment. That was a growth moment for me.
That's awesome. That's awesome. Thank you for sharing that.
Yeah.
So going back to Randel asked about Tongguda, right?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. So with Tongguda, I try to basically improve on certain, I wouldn't say weaknesses, because it's not that martial arts have weaknesses. It's more, if a martial art is a complete system or, a comprehensive system, then it's not that the martial art has weaknesses. It's more so that people, fighters, practitioners, teachers, we have weaknesses as people. But there are certain areas where certain martial arts, don't have a certain frame of mind that they could have had and are just choosing not to engage with. Just like a very good example that I like to use in BJJ. If BJJ had the Phoenix Eye Fist, not even for striking, just for poking, that's an enormous game changer. All of BJJ would change. I proved this to BJJ practitioners over and over and over again, especially if you know acupuncture points, and especially in the center of the body. If someone leans against you, putting the Phoenix Eye Fist, and you don't even have to be good at it, within the space, into the spaces with between the ribs of anybody, nearly 100% of people would roll over in a moment with the lightest pressure. It's very easy. It's very seldom that people are not sensitive in these areas. It doesn't have to be Dimmak, Dianmai, special death touch. You just have to press in the right spot, and there are numerous spots on the chest cavity to press, a lot of them. And if it's an acupuncture point like liver 14, all the better. And what happens is the serratus anterior muscles that envelop the ribs and the spaces between them, serratus anterior help the chest and the anterior deltoid, the front deltoid, and the biceps to close down the body inside and inward to the front. And if you pressure the serratus anterior in that way by using the Phoenix Eye Fist, just press against the rib spaces, especially in specific areas, but in nearly all rib spaces, that causes a spasm within the serratus anterior, and then the elbows open up sideways and back. And so that defeats most types of chokes. That defeats a person laying over you. That defeats a lot of techniques, and you can teach it to a 120-pound teenager girl. It's the easiest thing to do. And BJJ willingly chooses not to do this because it's too much of a game changer. It's not that they're dumb. It's just as bad as introducing grabbing the testicles to BJJ. Of course, BJJ people like to show if they're very skilled, they can put you in positions where you can't really grab the testicles. Okay, that's legit. If you're very good, okay, maybe you can put a person in a position where you can't do that sometimes. Fine. But it's as useful, almost as useful. So likewise, we have things in traditional Chinese martial arts, certain specific arts that are not used. For example, in the core art, the art that served for much of the theoretical basis of what I do in terms of understanding the internal arts and such. In Xingyi Chuan, you have the problem that the art is stepping into a linear fashion. Now, I really don't like the statement that Xingyi Chuan is a linear martial art, because it is not. Because you are supposed to have circles and spirals in every single movement, even movements that look straight.
Yep.
So that much is true. But the art is somewhat linear nonetheless in the way that it likes to work on narrow lines of application. either in stepping or in applying techniques. And sometimes it can get too narrow for its own good. It doesn't much emphasize the sideways nature that, for example, is quite typical of Wing Chun. Wing Chun has a lot of sideways emphasis. And then Wing Chun doesn't do it exactly the way that Southern Mantis or Pak Mei would do it. And then all of these arts don't have the circular stepping and the way that you can turn your back to the opponent and still get the better of him that Baguazhang has. But then Baguazhang doesn't have the straight line, the streamlined, tight spiral nature that Xingyi has, or the linear, overbearing, straight fist of Wing Chun, etc. So my initial take when I saw it, well, I didn't want to create a new martial art. It ended up being something new because I wanted to basically bond a curriculum of everything I know, going from point A to B to C to Z, in a coherent fashion that is perhaps more, it is friendlier in terms of how the curriculum is structured, friendlier for the modern Western-minded practitioner. And it turned out to be something new because after working on this for a span of 5 years or so, I found that it no longer exactly looks like any of these other arts to the degree that I can call it any of these other arts. I also had the problem that in Southern Mantis, because it is very political, although maybe I was skilled enough to teach it, maybe not. I certainly was not certified to teach Southern Mantis. So I had a ton of Southern Mantis in what I was doing, but I couldn't teach it as Southern Mantis. So how can I teach it without being it? I had to break down the whole thing and teach it differently. Mm-hmm. Simply has to do with me not, I wouldn't test for degrees in Southern Mantis. I mostly studied sometimes I would go to group classes. I mostly studied privately under my Shifu because we were all, both were teachers and we had a different understanding. And so I didn't, like, I attended tests up to like equivalent of like a yellow belt. I mean, like a yellow belt in Southern Mantis, which is funny because, I can hold my own weight with any Southern Mantis practitioner. I mean, if I was to go and demonstrate the different powers of Southern Mantis and different techniques and this and that, I don't think that I'm below any Shifu's level, but I'm just not certified. So I don't have my teacher's permission. Fine. I'll call it something else. And now I wouldn't use your forms. I'll use something else. I'll make it my own. So that way we both live peacefully with it, I guess. So in most of the Southern Mantis I ever studied is inside of Tonggu Dao. It just doesn't look like the Southern Mantis that I studied. I made it look different. And then that was actually a huge advantage because I wasn't limited by the mindset of Southern Mantis. Because Southern Mantis really is an art in all lineages of Southern Mantis. It's an art with a theme. It wants to be something very specific, and I'm not limited by that theme. Actually, I'm not limited by any theme. It's an advantage. I think that there are several martial arts that have a theme about them. Bagua has a very strong theme about it. Southern Mantis has it. Xingyi Chuan also, more so Xingyi Liu Chuan, one of the predecessors of Xingyi Chuan, has a very strong, rather than the theme, you could also call it the flavor. It's a very, very specific flavor to it. Mm-hmm. And over time, I think Tonggu Dao has gotten to have its own flavor, but it's not really limited. So, for example, in Xingyi Chuan, we have monkey. There are 12 animals in Xingyi Chuan, but the animals are not an animal mimicry style and manner of movement, but I rather use the strategies and tactiques of the animals with the overarching structure and movements of the art and the principles of the art. But then, over the years, that was one of the newer things that I put into my Tongguda was that the monkey actually made it just a little bit more monkey-like. A little bit more monkey-like than most Xingyi Quan. And I thought, why not? Because I apply it in more monkey-like fashion. And people go on YouTube and they write like Jonathan Bluestein animals. You'd find there's a video of mine showing free-form practice and application of the animals. The forms don't actually look exactly like I practice there. It's just a free-form practice for the camera and just free-form. I'm doing Rosho, which is the Xingyi equivalent, Bago equivalent of Toisho. If you're just moving just random wrestling of sorts with the students, and then I float into techniques from that, and then nothing in that video is rehearsed or planned, and neither my solo practice or my applications. And in there, I demonstrate the monkey, and anybody who views that would see, hey, but monkey is really monkey-like. It has gotten even more monkey-like since then. And it was amazing because we filmed that, and then in the image I used for the video, I saw, wow, I was up in the air, jumped in the air, and I was striking the student on the neck. And I thought, wow, this really looks like a macaque monkey. I really look like the damn monkey. I didn't even realize. And I went on Google and I found a nearly identical image, of a monkey in the air in that particular posture. And awesome. What is the idea with, the animals in Xingyi Quan, to the best of my understanding? The idea is that in the midst of combat, you can change the spirit of how you fight and how your movements and energy feel to the opponent to match the energy of the opponent. So, for example, if the opponent is much weaker than yourself, then you can use the tiger or the dragon, and often the horse. If the opponent is much weaker than yourself and is also not that maneuverable, you can use tiger or dragon, which are very aggressive, offensive, and head-on, and go strength against strength. If the opponent is maybe slightly weaker than yourself but is mobile, maybe you use the horse. If the opponent is much stronger than you and is stiff, you'd use the monkey, because you can go around him and also climb him, use his arms like branches because he's strong and stiff. His arms are so strong, you can literally jump and cling to his arms and use them for leverage to whatever, often to hit his head, or to go around him by jumping and clinging on his arm, and then basically like a monkey grabbing a branch and then swinging behind the tree. You can do that with a very strong, tall person who is very stiff. But you got to practice that, of course. And the monkey actually encapsulates the Shungwa. In the model of the 8 trigrams, Shungwa is a trigram of wind. So the monkey, in my understanding, in Xingyi Quan, even though Xingyi Quan is constructed around the 5 phases, some people mistakenly call them the 5 elements. I think actually the Chinese, if you look at the Carta for Xing, I think I have come to call them in Hebrew the 5 walkings, or I think basically if we were to be very accurate about it, it should be the 5 walking transitions. Like transitions to basically walk from place to place, 5 walking transitions. I think that was what was intended in the Carter Xing, which of course is the same Xing in Xingyi Quan. The Xing is, in that context, is form, and Yi is intent, the fist of form and intent, and that is a whole other lecture in its own right. But I think the Xing in the context of Wu Xing and the 5 phases is the 5 transitional walkings. And so when I say Shungwa, I'm talking about the trigram of wind. This is like outside of the theory of Xingyi Quan. But I identify the Xingyi monkey with wind. The way that wind moves, if you read about wind in the I Ching, in the Book of Changes. And I think that people also, if we digress a little bit, people misunderstand the union of Xingyi Quan and Baguazhang. Like what? It's not just that, one is has more circle of stepping, and the one is more direct, and etc. And this goes more head on usually, and the other one goes around. It's not just that. It's also because Shinigami took the theory of the 5 phases and worked with it and created an art that goes around that. And actually, the 12 animals. What is 5 phases and 12 animals? The 12 animals are like it's basically 10 earthly stems and 12 heavenly branches. That is the whooshing, the 5 phases, is like the 5 yin organs of the body, right? It's the lungs, kidneys, liver, heart, and spleen. Lungs, kidneys, liver, heart, and spleen. But in Chinese medicine, you branch them out to 10 because this is the philosophical numerical system that was used originally. So every one of the 5 is a yin and a yang. So the lungs go with the large intestine, the kidneys go with the bladder, the liver goes with the gallbladder, the heart goes with the small intestine, the spleen goes with the stomach. So together you have 10. So these are 10 earthly branches, 10 celestial stems. I was confusing the names. Sorry. I'm used to thinking about this like in Chinese and Hebrew and English, and sometimes I get confused about that. Okay, so
you're good. You're good.
So 10 celestial stems and 12 earthly branches. Okay, 10 celestial stems, 12 earthly branches. The 5 phases represent the 10 celestial stems. What are the 10 celestial stems? They are the planets. If we like this goes into astronomy and astrology, but essentially, we are all under the influence of heavenly forces. I think everybody agrees that we are influenced by the sun and the moon, but for whatever reason, people are not so keen to agree that we are also influenced by the other 5 major planets in the solar system that surround the Earth, which is what Mercury, Venus, Saturn. I remember them like in their Hebrew names: Mercury, Venus, Saturn, Jupiter, and Mars. Mercury, Venus, Saturn, Jupiter, and Mars. These are the 5 major planets that are nearest to the Earth that affect our life on Earth in different ways. Like all ancient civilizations believe that. It's just that nowadays we have very silly horoscopes in the newspapers. So we think, like these idiots write those silly horoscopes, not talking about real horoscope. I'm talking about the shit in the newspaper. And they think, so this must be bullcrap. So astrology gets marginalized. Suddenly we're not talking about the planets affecting us. Suddenly it's only the moon and the sun. But actually, it's, in my opinion, my understanding, it's also the planets. These are the 10 celestial stems. 10 celestial stems are these, like, in my understanding, these are these 5 planets and their yin and yang sides to them. Which some would say, and I would believe, that this is why we have the 10 major organs reflecting these 5 influences with the yin and yang to them. Okay. And now the 12 earthly branches. We have 12 months of the year. The period around the sun is segmented to our circling the sun is segmented into 12 periods, and the Earth's spin around its own axis segmented to 12 periods, and the actual movement of the Milky Way, of our solar system in the Milky Way galaxy. The whole of the solar system moving in the Milky Way galaxy is segmented into 12 periods of, what is it? Can't remember the exact number, but the total cycle is, it's either, yes, it's 25,900 years. So, let's see, calculator. So 25,900 divided by 12. Yeah, that's, so it's almost 2,600. If it's 2,600 years divided by 12, that's 2,166, which you might recognize because it's almost 26,000. 2,166 is nearly about the number in 4K HD, right? Which is not, if you research it, you see it's not coincidental. But it's not exactly that because, but it's close. So periods of about 2,160 years. So around every 2,160 years, we completed another transition of the entire solar system in the Milky Way galaxy. And then some people say come under the influence of another constellation. Because we are, the whole of the solar system is closer to one of these constellations. So that's my understanding. There, by the way, other interpretations, don't take my word on that, because there are many forms of astronomy and astrology. And that was all to say, Xingyiquan is actually a shamanic system that was intended to reflect the philosophical, astronomical, and astrological ideas of the 10 celestial stems and 12 earthly branches in movement form, and the interrelationship between the number 5 represented in its extension from 5 in yin and yang, so that's 5 times 2, because it has a yin and yang, that's a 10. The 10 and the 12. Okay? And then Bagua comes in with a different numerical system with the numbers in the power of 2. 2 and 2 times 2 is 4, and 2 times 4 is 8, and 8 times 8 is 64. That is, in my personal understanding, the system that explains the quantum level of the universe. Okay? And we see that the numerical system of 2, 4, 8, 64, that reflects itself in different places. So if we said so the 10 celestial stems, 10 main internal organs, alluded to in traditional Chinese medicine, 12 earthly branches, 12 regular meridians in the human body. But there are also 8 exceptional vessels, 8 extraordinary meridians, and they are associated with the Bagua system. And in the Bagua system, the 2, 4, 8, 64, where do we see it? We see it in the developing cell. The cell begins, in the human embryo, when the yin and yang come together, the sperm meets the egg. And the yin and yang came together and they become one. And the one then becomes 2 cells. And then they divide, they always divide to 4. And then 60, and then from the 4 to 16, 32, 64. This division happens 100% of the time in all living embryos. I think not even only with mammals. All evolved animals develop through this model of the Bagua. Where do we always also see it? We see the I Ching in the 8 and the 64 in the structure of DNA. I didn't find this. People found this decades ago. It's also evident in other systems. So the Chinese, though they're sneaky, because nowhere can you read about what I was just saying. It's not written about it's written about in numerous books about astronomy, astrology, and Chinese philosophy. It's not at all written about in any freaking book about Chinese martial arts, for whatever reason. And the sneaky Chinese, like this fella Sun Lutang, the famous Xingyiquan teacher, and then also a Bagua and Taiji teacher, he knew all about this stuff, but he didn't tell us. Because they're sneaky. They want you to find out on your own, because Confucius, he said, the good student is, I give him a quarter and he comes back with the other 3 quarters. So the Chinese wanted us to figure this out. You know how many years it took me to figure this out? The person who actually exposed me to all of this was my dear Shifu, Professor Stephen Jackovitz, who's another genius. He's the wisest, most educated person that I know, not just in martial arts, Professor Stephen Jackovitz. And I started figuring this out under his tutelage. I was a Xingyiquan teacher for years before I knew this stuff. So, and a lot of people, most Xing Yi Chuan teachers know nothing about this because you don't get any explanations. And most of the Chinese who teach Xing Yi Chuan and Bao Guozhang and Tai Chi Chuan, they can't explain this. They don't know much about it. They've heard it a little bit here and there. It's like in their culture, goes in one ear, comes out the other. They heard it when they were 10 years old. They weren't old enough to understand because it's all freaking complex. It's really freaking complex. I read the I Ching. I guarantee you, the I Ching is like a post-PhD level book. It's not a book for kids. And you can't expect, most Li Loneng, the person who founded Xing Yi Chuan, was illiterate. How would an illiterate person be able to write about? He's illiterate. He can't write. So, and how is he going to explain things like that? He sort of knows. Of course he knew. Of course Li Loneng knew about this stuff. Now, by the way, one of the interesting things is in the history of Xing Yi Chuan, in Sini Liuhe, they had 5 movements, not in Dai Sini Liuhe, but in Sini Liuhe Chuan from the Hui Muslims. They had 5 basic movements and then 10 animals. Why did they move it? Why did Li Loneng transition from 5 movements, 10 animals to 5 movements, 12 animals? Because it was still in the context of 5 being turned into 10. He wanted a 5, which is a 10, and a 12. And that made more sense with the philosophy that, everything in China works around. Mm-hmm. And our martial arts are way deeper than people realize. People put insane stuff into it. And into Wing Chun. My Shifu, Professor Stephen Jakovitz, he says certain things about Wing Chun that I can't even say on this podcast because it would be so controversial. But, first, one thing he says, and I think that he would stand behind, he says Wing Chun was the art of assassins and pirates. It was an art, that was taught, we're talking 6, 7, 8 generations ago. It was an art taught by people who basically out to kill their business competitors. They're not nice people. And it wasn't made to be fancy because they weren't killing people in front of other people to make a show. They just had to kill them. And they had to train in tight spaces, and that is well known, of course. And he also says that, I don't know if it's really just his lineage of Wing Chun, and I'm being cautious here. I'm intentionally not mention which lineage and, his teacher and everything. Maybe it's just his lineage. Maybe, like he says, it's actually originally not in recent generations, but back then, is many lineages. He says Wing Chun is strongly Buddhist. Not just paying homage, certain Buddha, certain postures you'd have this posture is called, making the offering to the Buddha, right?
Yep.
No. He says, no, there's a whole lot of Buddhist religion in the actual Wing Chun. And in some lineages, they still teach the religious part. But probably Yip Man, I know, because his lineage also comes down somehow from Yip Man. I just don't want to be specific here. I don't know if Yip Man chose to not emphasize it and then his students do or whatnot, because Yip Man is always presented as having been a bit more secular. But Wing Chun in some lineages is very religious. It's literally, there's a worship of the Buddha through movements. Now, I'm not saying, this is not to say that Wing Chun is usually religious martial art. I think in 99.9% of cases, it is not. I'm just saying there's still lineages and sub-lineages like that. And that Professor Jakovitz would say, originally it was probably like that. And which is interesting how there are many sects like this in Buddhism. Buddhism is supposed to be about, all love and peace. And then, the Chinese got Buddhism from India and they're like, love and peace and kill your competitor. All works together. And then there's love and peace.
You got the yin and yang. You got the yin and yang.
Yeah. So I'm just saying, much like the Chinese when a lot of teachers brought in, they merged the Xingyi and the Bagua together to bring in those theories. So I did similar things, but not necessarily in terms of theory, but more so in terms of the many different types of possibilities, technical possibilities. So for instance, one of the arts that I studied is Shaolin Jinggang Basher. Shaolin Jinggang Basher is literally the Jinggang. Jinggang is a type of Buddhist deity, by the way, an aggressive, violent, warlike Buddhist deity. So the Jingang's Basher 8 postures of Shaolin. Jingang's 8 postures from Shaolin. This is an art that I studied. Maybe I learned about 20% of that style, but also I actually learned some of the most advanced practices because I was not taught the curriculum in an orderly fashion. From Shigong Zhou, my late Shigong Master Zhou Jingxuan, who's no longer with us, sadly, in Tianjin. So that art has a lot of stepping methods, which are very evasive, quite unique, that you see they don't exist in Xingyichuan, in Piguazhang, in Southern Mantis, in Bagua. Maybe, I think a lot of them do exist in the Li family system of arts that I'm studying now. By the way, my teacher in that is Master Brian Hall, who's a wonderful person. And but it's very unique the way that this art moves around. If you were to go on YouTube and look for Zhou Jingxuan, Z-H-O-U, Zhou, Z-H-O-U, Jingxuan is X-U-A-N. Then there are many videos of him demonstrating that art, and you could see it moves in a very unique way. So all of these stepping methods, which are very combatively viable, some of them are close to Western boxing, were not present in any of the other arts I studied. And I thought, why can't you take some of the movements and practices from these arts and diversify them with these stepping methods? What they do, by the way, the core curriculum of Tongbu is made of about 25 movements, and the students learn those 25 movement combinations. And I teach them how to take these 25 movement combinations and use them with numerous types of stepping methods. So you have 13 core stepping methods and then combinations thereof. And the idea is to make them as maneuverable, agile, pliable, like Western boxer. And after they could take 25 movement combinations, very simple movement combinations, but very effective, that encapsulate, most of the basic striking and basic grappling that we do. They can take these 25 options times 13 different types of steps and master that. Then they have basically they have all different types of vectors, circles, and spirals that they could potentially use in martial arts. And then what I would teach them, and of course, in between, there are many, many things. Like there's a partner form to teach joint locks. There is some ground grappling in the way that they teach that, and partner drills and striking drills and all sorts of things. But basically, it's the core 25 movements times 13 ways to step. Once they can do that, and they feel that they can move very freely and eloquently with the martial arts in space, so they're not limited by, the framework of this or that form. There are no forms at that stage. Then they can get to what I call Hunyuan Chuan. Hunyuan Chuan is the name of the long form that I created that basically has nearly all of the curriculum. 95% of everything I know is in it. It's a long form. It takes 20 minutes to complete at a walking pace. So if you were to do, not a jog, but you pace quickly on the street, if you practice the form at that pace, semi-fast walking, it would take you 20 minutes to complete.
Wow.
And so that's something that I never had. Because I studied some Chen Taiji Chuan under several teachers, most of them colleagues of mine. And I found that these long forms they have in Taiji are very useful. So I thought, okay, so they have something like more akin to Western boxing, but way more diversified because it's traditional martial art. I teach them to move freely in space whilst retaining the core essence of the art. By the way, I said there are no forms. That's not exactly true because there's joint locking form, there's also a form that's sort of similar in concept to Sunim Tao that I studied from Master Brian Hall, that actually teaches all the different hand bridges that can be used in empty-handed fighting. Basically, just every single hand bridge, like this,
okay.
this, any hand bridge. So we use that, and it's also something that I use in more advanced level to teach a very advanced form of Qigong, to put inside of that form. So that's like a type of Jibingo. So then they get to the Huiyan trend, that's long form, 20-minute form, and they stop doing almost everything and they focus on that instead. So they transition from the free-flowing to the long form practice, but they still work on applications, of course, and they start working more on the Neigong. So when I started Xing Yi Chuan, you were doing Jianzhuang, the standing practices from your first class. And I found this is not that helpful with modern Western students. I do work very well with it. Most people are not that patient enough, and it takes them too many years to advance. But by the time they've gotten to it after, say, anywhere between 3 to 6 years of doing the core art that I teach, they get to the long form and then they get to the standing, much easier for them.
Yep.
I do let them stand in Mabu a little bit, up to 10 minutes, just to get the hang of it during those earlier stages. And then after that stage, when they study the whole long form and they get all the Neigong that's inside of it and everything that they put in there, then the next phase is going back to stage 1, but you learn a whole lot. You learn the Bagua that I know, and you learn the Li family stuff that I know, and there's weaponry. Although sometimes if students ask, I would teach them the weaponry much earlier. Because as I wrote a chapter about this in the Martial Arts Teacher 2. The chapter is called Weapons Keep Students. I find that, students like weapons. So if a student is really keen on studying a weapon, if they're going to train hard enough and not let the weapon take them away from the empty hand, I'll teach them a weapon earlier. Sure, they can choose one of the weapons and we'd work on that. And so it's like the structure of shohari in Japanese. Regrettably, I always forget what it's called in Chinese, but they also have a term for shohari. Is the beginning, middle, and end of a traditional Japanese play. So that's how Tongbudao is structured. They go from the single movements and single movement combinations and taking them and practicing them freely. Also with a partner in different ways. Also, at these stages, there's a whole lot of work on partner drills and the Rosho, which is, again, different equivalents of the Tui Sho that we have in Xing Yi Chuan in my martial art. Mm-hmm. There's a whole lot of that and a whole lot of applications. Then that's the Sho and the Ha, the middle. They go to the long form and then they go back to the single movement practices, because by the end of the day, as most traditional martial arts teachers know, the single movement practices are what builds the bulk of your skill and not the forms when you're advanced enough. So then they go back and they have a perspective, and they, of course, can still practice the form, and their weapons forms, they can work on that, but then it goes back to more emphasis on single movement practice. And then we completed that cycle. As far as I'm concerned, unfortunately, I'm not close to having been able to teach the whole curriculum yet. I think the average student coming in for like two classes a week would not even be able to complete the whole curriculum. But say if they came 3 or 4 times a week, it's probably going to be like a 15-year process. If they came every day, though, I do believe that someone who's coming in every day, I could teach them everything I know in 7 to 8 years. Mm-hmm. But alas, nobody comes every day.
Have you right? Have you worked on this model yourself? Have you used it in your own training, Jonathan?
Yes, of course. This marks my own progression.
Okay.
This is how I progress through the arts as well. Yeah.
Very good. Very good. I like it because it seems to me like it's globalized, right? So these small pieces mimic the long, have DNA, if you will, of the longer system in it.
Exactly. So the idea is that all of the spirals and circles and movement vectors that they worked on when they had these 25 pieces times 13 ways to move, this is all then reflected in the long form. And then what the long form does, it presents them with way more intricate ways to express these movements and movement combinations.
Okay.
Rather than what they do in Tai Chi Chuan, which is, especially in Chen Tai Chi Chuan, which is the opposite, which I'm so sorry for saying this, I'm not sure is the best teaching strategy, where they teach them the most complex, most nuanced things inside the form, and then trying to break it down to basics. It works for some people. I think it doesn't work for most people.
Right. Mm-hmm. And so with the West, is this kind of an approach? Because you had said you had been working on a lot of stuff for the Western student, and has this the Tongbu Dao been the answer, in your opinion, to synthesizing all of your work for a Western mindset in the Chinese model?
Short answer is, ask me in 20 years.
Okay. Sounds good.
But thus far, I can tell you that, I started with the Tongbu Dao curriculum. It was rather new and far from being entirely formalized when I started it about 4 years ago. And then shortly thereafter, maybe 8 months later, I moved abroad. And then I came back. But I find that nowadays it's much easier for me to teach the traditional martial arts to my students. Now, of course, there are many styles, I think, that have already built the curriculum in a way that is easier to teach to Western audiences, even if they did not intend it as such. For example, I think that Wing Chun is very student-friendly. I think that Wing Chun, in terms of how it condenses its core principles and ideas, is quite brilliant. It's one of the most brilliant martial arts curriculums ever conceived of, most probably. And this is part of why Wing Chun is so popular, simply because it has a superior curriculum structure. And people don't pay attention to that.
I started Wing Chun back in 1998 in college. And the class was run by the head of the mathematics department at Mesa in Grand Junction, Colorado. And his Shifu, which is my Shifu now, Shifu Mayer, was working on his PhD in educational psychology and cognitive development. And so he would really have a kind of a westernized approach to everything, but you were dealing with college kids from the ages of 17 to 23, and, all full, young, mainly male, full of testosterone, very excited. But he got our mindsets focused on these drilling patterns, and it was the learning process that really fascinated us, because you had 3 or 4 kids in the teaching program. You had a couple English kids. You had 4 or 5 math kids. You had kids that were doing sports psychology and performance. And so you got us at a point that we were doing something physical, but it was the learning process that fascinated us, because he would share some of his ideas on learning and the concept of learning. So I kind of have to agree with you. I'm kind of spoiled because I've got a teacher that taught how a system was presented to be learned as well as taught. And then we got to be guinea pigs as well in the process. But we were a part of a process of him getting his PhD from Texas A&M on it was drill-based performance over long-term learning and long periods of training. And so we would do these 3 drills for half an hour. And by the half an hour mark, because they were interchangeable, it'd be like Gong Lop, and then we have something called inside Pak Sao. This is a tip Pak Sao with an uppercut. And then we have normal Pak Sao, but they were all interchangeable. Like there was something that I could change to the Bong Lop, and then I could transition to the uppercut, and then I could transition back to this. And so any partner could transition at any point. And by the end of the drill, a half an hour, all the rookie students, their arms were down here. You couldn't recognize what they were doing. But all the people that have been with the system for like 4 or 5 years, there wasn't much energy on the arms, but you could still see it. But yeah, I think I agree with you. That's a long way to say I agree with you. Wing Chun is very approachable, very teachable, and very tangible.
I think as you were talking, I had in my mind, the manner of execution of Sionim Tao, the first form in Wing Chun. And I think now that's the first time it came to me that Sionim Tao actually hypnotizes the practitioner. I think that the people, because there are many strange aspects about it that can be explained, for example, by the religious connotations. And of course, it's also, for those in the know, it's a very advanced type of Qigong, which is not taught by 99.9% of Wing Chun teachers. They don't know the Qigong that's within Sionim Tao. But the point is, I think the form was also structured in a way that hypnotizes a person into the expression of the flavor of the style. And that is something that does not exist, for example, in my curriculum. So the first instance where and when my students experience something which is closer to self-hypnosis is with the Zhangzhuang, but that arrives later. The Wing Chun is designed in a way that right from the get-go, they are programmed to move in a very specific way to the art and not in another way. And this is something that Western boxing also achieves, but I think Western boxing achieves that simply because there's so few movements and possibilities, technically speaking, that because you basically repeat that so much that you become a thing. Boxers are a thing unto itself. And in Wing Chun, there are way more possibilities, but somehow people also become a thing unto itself through this process of the Sionim Tao self-hypnosis. I'm not saying maybe that's only the third or fourth most important function of that form, but it is there.
Yeah, it's very fascinating. I've done that form now for 25 years. That's weird to say out loud. And I still find connections. I feel very lucky. My Sifu Mayor, was the sole inheritor on the U.S. side from Wong Q. And Sigong Wong Q wasn't very well known. He actually worked for the British government as he was a civil engineer. And so he actually had money and he had some free time. And he was one of the first people to ever learn the mokjong. But Sifu Yip Man didn't have a mokjong at the time. So when Yip Man taught Wong Q the mokjong at the beginning, he taught him to him as a partner form. So we have three kind of wooden dummies. The true wooden dummy, and then we have partner form A, and then we have partner form B, right? So it's a long 110 movement 2-man set. You've got the 110 on the one side, the attacking side. You got the 110 on the offensive side, so to say. And
I mean, that's an interesting story, but I've also heard that the partner form for the wooden dummy always existed. Other lineages say
it did. It did always exist. That's right. It wasn't made up. No, this was something that always existed. It's just the thing is, in the greater Yip Man world, it's been forgotten. And the reason that I think that it's so important, it shows a bridge between the three unarmed forms and the wooden dummy. Mm-hmm. Because people don't realize that the wooden dummy is basically the other three forms unfolded like origami, right? So the other three forms are a folded up version of everything that's in the mokjong. And the partner forms are a living bridge between the unarmed forms, and the Mokjong. It makes it make sense. And so when I still do Sunam Tao, I see links to the dummy. I see links to our drills. I see links to the sticky hands. I see links to Chisao. I see links to the weapons. And so that's why I would
give, if it's probably, in history there is a competing set of two theories between historians. Some say that the bulk of history is driven by the big man theory. That,
sure.
Once in a while comes a very important, very charismatic person and either for good or bad, they change history. And some historians say, no, history is something that is driven by cumulative changes that happen through culture and society over time. And sure, sometimes there are charismatic leaders and influencers, but overall it's more society. And it's very interesting to think, was the Wing Chun curriculum really created by this one amazing person, or did it develop slowly and gradually?
Over time, yeah.
Over time, because in the Chen village, we do know that these forms evolved very slowly over time. Every generation made a few changes here, a few changes there. So there is certainly an organic change within the family that happened over a very long period of time. I would dare say that if the entirety of the Wing Chun curriculum was created mostly or all by a single person, I would give that person a Nobel Prize.
Yeah, agreed.
Agreed. For any martial arts, this is maybe difficult to understand for martial arts students. But if someone is a martial arts teacher and they realize how difficult it is to just structure a basic form, to just have a form even begin and end in the same spot, it's so difficult that the teachers sometimes just give up. Like in China, there are many forms where they're like, oh, I start here and I end there because, who cares? Who cares? Even though it has use, I'll talk about in a second. My 20-minute long form that I created, phony, it's 20 minutes long and it ends in exactly the same spot. And you go around a lot. And it goes all over the place. In diagonal lines and circle lines, and then you cross yourself and you even jump a few times here and there, all sorts. You still end up in the same place. So I was just saying, for someone to have created something like Wing Chun, I'm not saying there's no best martial art, but it's damn close to being the best curriculum you can find in terms of structure. Whoever created this was an utter genius.
Agreed.
Absolute genius.
Agreed.
The Bagua systems, like the Bagua in its modern iteration, Baguazhang, started fairly recently. So we're talking about, late 19th century, right?
Yep.
And also Xingyichuan. Xingyichuan is about 160 years old, give or take, the modern iteration by Li Longlong. The Bagua people are still working through the curriculum structure. Even if you look like perhaps the best structured, the two best structured Bagua styles that I've seen. Like the one that I've studied is the Qingcheng Mountain Bagua, which is a pre-Dong Haitren style. It's not well known. Qingcheng Mountain is in Sichuan, for those lineage of my teacher, Master Stephen Jakovitz. For his Shifu, my Shigong Grandmaster Zhang Yuanming. That's one system. The other one is the Yin style Bagua of Xie Peiqi, which is taught by He Jinbao and his American students in the United States. These systems of Bagua have a most exceptional curriculum, really well thought out, and even they are still tweaking it. There are about 6 generations in, and they're tweaking to the point that Xie Peiqi released with his top student, who's now Xie Peiqi is gone now, and He Jinbao is the head of the system in that style lineage of Yin style Bagua. And they recorded in the early 2000s, they recorded a set of videos, it was already the DVDs, showcasing all movements in their system. They don't show all the internal practices, but all movements and much of the applications, maybe most of the applications. And by the way, that set of videos, I think, is on YouTube now, because they have Hajin Bao, at the request of his teacher, Xie, he continued to tweak the system, and they continued. And now he wants to do a new set of videos showcasing the entire system, because 20-something years later, I think they did around 2000. So it's already different enough that they want to record a better set of videos. So they tweak. And the Wing Chun was already at the level of sophistication, if not more, than it is now 100 years ago. So that's how advanced it is in terms of curriculum structure. And also, I just briefly mentioned something that I gotta say, like the idea of like, why would you even start and finish a form in the same place? I think it's very important, because then you know for sure if you fucked up or you changed something in the middle.
I like that. I like that a lot.
I use it. It's not as evident in the Wing Chun forms because it's all in relatively tight spaces. But if you go about 20 minutes and you end, a few feet from where you started, you're like, okay, I fucked up. Where did I fuck up, and why?
Yeah.
Yeah, so you can go on an investigation. Teaches you a lot. Even though, with things, I don't typically screw up with phony and Chun. I almost always finish at the exact same spot. But some other forms, like I might not do a weapons form for like a month, because I'm into other things. I'm also learning. So the newer stuff I give precedent to, because it's more important for me to assimilate that. And then I'll do a weapons form, and just because I'm creative, I might slightly, without even consciously thinking about it, I might change a movement to be applied differently within the form. And then I might end up like a step distance from where I started. And I'm like, what changed from a month ago? What did I do here? And then I find the change. I find what the hell it was that I did. I find, maybe I should change it within the form. Maybe it made sense. Or maybe I should be careful. I should not make that mistake again. That taught me quite a bit over the years with different forms that I studied. Quite a bit.
How long have you been working, not to change too much, because we can even tie in the Lee family into how you're still teaching now, but how long have you been working into the Lee family system? And what do you think it's been brought to the table for you as a learner, as a continuous learner, and as a practitioner, and as a teacher?
Okay, so after having already met and studied some years with Master Stephen Jakovitz, my criteria for whomever could be my teacher was quite high. Because this guy studied martial arts since he was a teenager. He's now mid-50s. And he is a professor of Chinese medicine. He's fluent, conversant, can write, read everything in modern classical Chinese and modern classical Korean, and has studied and can teach Wing Chun, Aikido, Judo, some Japanese Jiu-Jitsu, I think. He even studied some Koga-ryu ninjutsu in a closed-door school, which was very interesting because they had very thin cloths on their faces. They don't even know each other's identities except for the guy who brought them into school, which is pretty insane. And he said, Shifu Stephen says, "This is the best school I ever studied at because nobody knew anybody, so there's no ego." It's brilliant.
Yeah.
Brilliant. And it was very intense. And so it's just Wing Chun and Judo and Aikido and probably some classical Jiu-Jitsu a little bit here and there. There's the Koga-ryu ninjutsu, which I don't think he can teach, but he said at that school for a while, and Iaido, which he can teach, and Xingi and Taiji and Bagua.
Ooh.
Wow.
And did all of that while studying these two Asian languages, which each one of these languages is a full-time job, and he has 2 PhDs in Chinese medicine. And the dude is something else. He's an amazing person, and his martial arts are so high level. I was like, and the first class I ever had with him, which is funny, I'm mostly a student of his in Chinese medicine, Chinese philosophy, and also in martial arts. But I also studied a whole lot of martial arts from him, and especially in terms of theory and history and philosophy. And first class I ever had with him, he's in New York. I had to travel. He's basically like, we were doing Wing Chun. So he wanted me, even though I came for the Bagua, he wanted me to also be in the Judo and Shuaijiao and Wing Chun classes. So I get a broader scope of experience, given, I've already studied many arts, so it wouldn't hurt me to, for a beginner to meddle with many styles, that's a bad idea. But for me, it's just interesting experiences. And we started with the Wing Chun. And in the middle of the class, we did some freeform Chisao. I was working with a student of his who was very good. I had a hard time with a student of his, and that student only had like a 5-year training.
Oh,
and
wow.
That student was good.
Wow.
So he was like, but I was playing with that student. I could push him back, but he was just aggressive. He was good. And so he probably saw me from the side, like sort of quote unquote bullying that other student, even though like I was nice, right? But it got intense, a little bit of ego between the two of us, even though his student is a wonderful person. Dave, he's a lovely guy. I really love that person. So then he says like, okay, now you do Chisao with me. It wasn't Chisao. He just kicked my butt. He just beat me up. But it's funny, it's also, so the guy trains like 25 years worth of martial arts, probably more than I, and he's 6'4" and I'm 5'6", and he probably has like 80 pounds more than I. It was a nice beating. It was funny. But I think he made the point of don't get cocky. You might be a teacher, but like, you don't get cocky. And the way he introduced me also, we had the Bagua class, and he says, oh, this is Jonathan. He comes from, Southern Mantis. So he doesn't know internal arts. We're here to show him internal arts. And he knew that I know. It was just like, you little kid, you're going to shut up and you're going to play along. And that was the message. So he's so good. And he's not that aggressive, by the way. He's, aside from these experiences, he's just the sweetest, kindest person. Really. He's a good soul. So, with that's sort of someone as your teacher already. I really wasn't thinking of taking on any other teacher for many years to come. I also felt that my cup was full, and it is full. It's goddamn overflowing, but I keep pouring in.
I get it, man. I get it.
And also, like, I got so much shit to practice, and I practice every day, and it's never enough. So, and then, so I get this, I called a buddy of mine, Chris Fleming. Where's he at right now? I think he's back in Pennsylvania. Chris Fleming is one of the more serious martial arts dudes that I know in Chinese martial arts. He's not a teacher, but he has been practicing like 20-something years. He's going around, he's studying with many teachers, studied many different Chinese styles. And Chris is also a big dude. He's 6'4", 6'5", and he's a bulky dude. He trains hard at the gym, and he spars regularly with a lot of different people. So he's always looking for those hidden dragons in the martial arts community, people nobody's heard of, and might be special. And he went and he found this guy, Brian Hall, in Boston, and he went to visit him. Chris is a very devout guy, Chinese martial arts. He goes and he travels far to study with different teachers. Mm-hmm. So he went to check out his Iron Palm, and in the conversation he was telling me, I went to see this Brian guy. I said, I'm going to tell you something, but you're not going to believe me. I said, what? Like, this guy is, I think for Brian is 5'11". So he's not a small guy. He's also like a thick guy, but he's also not huge. He said, this guy can kill me with one hand behind his back. I was like, what? Because Chris, really, he's going to Santa classes, and sparring with very serious people. He wouldn't say of anybody lightly that they could just take him down with one hand. He's a very powerful guy. So I was like, oh, interesting. But he said, no, you're not going to believe me. You're going to on his Facebook and you're not going to believe me. I was like, all right. So send me his Facebook. And so we kept talking. So I go on his Facebook. And what I see is this chubby looking, religious Jewish dude who dresses funny and goes to comic book conventions and to conventions with like B-movie stars to get their signatures and geek out with them over like the silliest shit, and writes children's books about owls. I'm like, that dude? He says, yeah, that dude. I'm like, no way. So, since he's Jewish, it's easier for us Jews to get talking together. So I got talking with him. Not at all interested in studying with him, not because he's not good. I didn't even know what he was doing. Right? Mm-hmm. It's just Chris has said so many wonderful things about this man. He looked interesting. I'm curious because he's this hidden dragon. He has very little on his Facebook. He has a little bit here and there about martial arts. Same with the karate-gi from years ago and some very old photos. So we get talking and we befriend each other and we talk for about 6 months. And I tell him that, I started an iron palm practice, which I regret not having started earlier. And he tells me, we have the iron, my lineage, we have iron palm and this. And I told this guy and, a lot of people come to me to study iron palm and because, they hear that they have this, but, I'm not that, happy to teach it because people are just, some people are clowns and some people want to use it for bad purposes. They want to just do this so they can take revenge on someone, or they're just going to be overzealous and injure themselves and all sorts of problems. So he's not at all happy. Like he's on one hand, Shifu Brian, he's looking for people to be serious disciples and really get in and deep in his martial arts. But on the other hand, he's been disappointed with a lot of people over the years who seemed serious at first and then, went their own way eventually and wasted their potential. So after about 6 months for this iron palm thing, we decided like maybe I can help you write a book because he's just so busy. He can write his own books. But he's so busy as for little kids. He's a wonderful family man, a father. And I can help you write that book about iron palm, and you can teach me I was looking for Qigong to accompany the iron palm because there's special types of Qigong that help you keep your palms flexible and healthy, and for the palms not to stiffen up and for you to not get arthritis from that type of practice. Yep. And I didn't have anybody to teach me this type of Qigong, and he knew a fantastic Qigong for that. It's called the Jade Turtle Qigong. Jade Turtle Qigong. Very interesting type of Qigong from Shaolin. Very simple to learn, by the way. And so he started teaching me that, and that's how we got rolling. And eventually from that into his Li family martial arts, not just that Qigong, because he's very eager to teach. He's a teacher who's very happy, like to share. He just wants to share. He's very generous. So, yeah, we've been rolling things. We sort of, like the book is slightly on pause, but once in a while, as I progress through the iron palm, I add a little bit more and more into it. The iron palm book, that's like a project for 5 years from now, maybe. In the process, it also helped, we talk a lot. Sometimes we have 3-hour conversations on crazy shit like mythology and demons and whatnot. He's an expert on world religions and languages, and he's very interested in Hebrew, and he has studied very well biblical Hebrew. Mm-hmm. So he could, as a religious Jew, he wanted to understand the Hebrew Bible and its language of origin. That is why. But he can't speak much Hebrew, and especially not modern Hebrew. So I'm helping him with the Hebrew. He's helping me with my martial arts. And most of our conversations, he's just telling me tons of martial arts lore and teaching me about life. And, even though we sort of teach one another, he's my Shifu. It's quite obvious. He's in his early 50s. I'm in my mid 30s, and still he is a Shifu to me. I call him Shifu. I consider him my teacher. He's a very wise man, self-taught. He has some academic degrees, but he's self-taught on a whole lot of things. There's thousands of books in his house. Whenever somebody has thousands of books in his house and he's read them all, that's the person worth talking to. I know only 2 people like that. I know sort of 3 people. So I know Grandmaster Keith Kenspert. He has 4,000 books in his house. I've seen them. and I randomly opened books and I saw his notes. I know he's read them all. He really did. So that's one person. I know Shifu Brian has that many books in his house that he's read. Shifu Steven, I'm sure has read as many books. I don't think he kept most of them, but he's probably read as many books by the amount of knowledge the guy has. So, so the Lee family system, he was just lucky. He was taught since age 4 by his father. He was taught Goju Ryu Karate from a rare lineage from Okinawa that is quite, on one hand, the kata are sort of the same. Not exactly, but sort of the same as the mainstream Goju kata. But he has many things that most of Goju Karateka don't have. For example, he has, we're talking about the partner form Wing Chun. He has many partner drills that teach you how to transition the kata into free flow combat, into sparring.
That's awesome.
And that is quite unique. And also, he has been telling me that the original way to train kata in Goju Ryu is that the kata are only a template. The sensei is supposed to teach you how to take the different combinations from the kata and recombine them in any way you see fit for every single kata. And people have just forgotten about this. This wasn't taught. And he has that. And he has a few other things that are somewhat more internal in Goju that other people don't have. And then, so he was very good in martial arts already when he was in his teens. And somehow through connections, I think he was in college, and then he was living with Chinese Americans who spoke Chinese. He learned Chinese from them. He has a gift for languages. He's also, Shifu Brian, he was, I don't know if he's still, I think he was conversational in Cantonese, and he certainly knows he's Japanese. He can speak Japanese. And so other than English, so it's also impressive. He knows English well, of course, it's American, can read and write well in biblical Hebrew. Now he knows a little bit of modern Hebrew as well, and can converse and read in Japanese, and probably can speak a little bit in Chinese. So he's not practiced in years, but used to speak fluently with his roommates in college. So I think it was through these Chinese connections, because he used to spend a lot of time in Chinatown. So he got into his Shifu under the Li system. It's a family that sort of keeps its secrecy because they're involved with, let's just say, shady business in China. So if I'm not mistaken, there weren't even a Li family back in the day in China. They changed their family name. They're another common family name. The thing is, some people don't know, in China, they only have 100 or so common surnames that everybody uses.
Right.
I recently found out, for example, there's a famous scholar and general from the Romance of the Three Kingdoms, both historical and the book Romance of the Three Kingdoms, that a lot of people would know, called Zhuge Liang. And I thought that, so I was asking my Shifu Nitan, who also can read and write and speak in classical Chinese. I was asking him, so why is it a mistake that in English language books they call him Zhuge Liang, because Zhuge is 2 characters and Liang is 1. So I asked him, isn't this supposed to be the Liang Zhuge? Because usually that's how it is in Chinese. The family name is 1 character and the first name is 2 characters. He said, no, actually, it seldom happens, but there are very few examples of this. But Zhuge is a family name made of 2 characters.
Huh. And
it used to be more common in Japan. We see this in Japan. Most surnames, I think, most family names have 2 characters, not just the first names. So anyway, going back, so he got to study under that family, and that family has a system that goes right about like this. They have their Jibengong, and that Jibengong includes the Jade Turtle Qigong that essentially builds the basics for all the Neigong in their system. It's the Jade Turtle and this form called Iron Arms Silk Bridges. Iron Arms Silk Bridges, or in Chinese that's Tieshou Siqiao. Iron Arms Silk Bridges. And that is the form I was talking about that I actually put in Tonggu Dao. It's a new edition. I put it in about probably 8 months ago. And I told my students, well, this short form is kind of similar in some ways to Schilling Tao. That teaches you all the different bridges that you could use, nearly all possibilities in stand-up, empty-handed fighting, probably also in ground grappling. Like every single way, basically every single useful way you can twist your arm in palm. All of these different ways, and it just transitions between them, like one twist to another twist. And it's such a brilliant concept. So this is part of the Jibin Gong for the Li family system. So with Shifu Brian's permission, I just took this, put it in the beginning of Tonggudan, and I took my students on a weekend-long seminar. Friday, our weekends in Israel are Friday, Saturday. So Friday 4 hours, Saturday 4 hours. It's 2-hour classes with a break between them, so 8 hours total. I taught them the whole thing in 8 hours. I said, now that's like the basics before basics. That's what we do. It's so useful. I immediately saw the use for it, but I waited 6 months of me working on that form, so it'd be good enough to be confident to teach it.
Mm-hmm.
But it's only 6 months. Like I would have waited years maybe, but it's very close to a lot of things I studied in Southern Mantis. So it's because it's so close. It was almost like an extension. This form is an extension of Southern Mantis for me. Would work so well with Southern Mantis and Wing Chun and such and Pak Mei. I offered my Sifu, I told him, I would teach you that form so you can have it as Jibin Gong, because they don't have real Jibin Gong, in my opinion, in Southern Mantis. They jump into more advanced stuff right away, which is very confusing for people. And I told my Sifu, take it. I've never been able to give you anything in the martial arts. Take this. Please let me give it to you. So put it in the curriculum, and you have this thing. You've been searching for something like this to put as basics for students for years. Unfortunately, as of now, he hasn't taken it. Maybe in the future I'll convince him, but it would be extremely useful for his Southern Mantis students. Anyway, so the J Turtle, and then Yugui Qigong is the name in Chinese, and then Tia Shu Siqiao, iron arm silk bridges. That's the Taolu, the form for the basic bridges. After that, they have a Wuxing Tren, or a 5-faced fist. In this context, Wuxing Tren is 5 animals. So they have their own take on 5 animals, which is a mix of several different 5 animals, both southern and northern, that they collected several types and they mix them together. So the tiger is several tigers they put together. The crane is several cranes. Then, after that, of course, in the end, they have several weapons. All these systems have weapons, like the typical weapons, like the straight sword, the broadsword, the daojian, the qiang, the spear, the staff. All of these stuff, they come eventually, like later. But after the Wuxing Tren, after the 5 animals, which is builds the core basics, they have a lot of stuff going on. They have a long phoenix form. They have a water form. It's like a proto Taiji. I wouldn't be surprised if a lot of Taiji got inspiration from that. But the most interesting stuff that they have is the F5 birds, 5 bird styles. So every one of these is as long as the typical, say, Southern white crane, which is it's not a big system. These Southern crane systems relative to other systems. Some there would be, some of them are shorter than Wing Chun, let's say, in the span of the curriculum. But they have the 5 birds. He would smack me probably, you would not, because he's just sweetheart for Brian. But I don't remember all the bird names now because I haven't gotten to work on that yet. But there's there's a blackbird, there's an owl, there's a hawk, blackbird, owl, hawk, golden pheasant. Oh, and the black crane. Yeah, so blackbird, owl, hawk, golden pheasant, and black crane. These are the 5. And the golden pheasant is considered the most advanced. Shifu Brian says that this is the most advanced internal system that he'd ever seen. And given that I've not seen it yet, I'm quite curious. And he's shown me a lot. It's not just, we have so much to cover. I haven't gotten to it. It'll take a while. So after I skipped something. After the Yogui Qigong, the J-Turtle Qigong, the Tiesho Siqiao, the iron arm silk bridges, there are also transitory stages where they take the basics, and they show you, of course, how to apply them with your partner and this and that. There are a lot of parts that I'm not studying because for me that's redundant. That it's a level and it covers all the things that I know from many different other styles. I'm studying the stuff that is key to my development, which might end up being most of that system. I don't know. Mm-hmm. But for example, I'm not studying and if I had time, maybe, or if it was 10 years ago, I would have studied the whooshing trend, the five animal fist. But currently I'm not studying that. So I am studying what is leading to the 5 birds, which is what Shifu Brian really wants to teach. He sees like the highest thing that he knows that he really wants to teach on forward, even though he also highly considers his Gojo Ryu. He has some students who study that Gojo Ryu now. So to get to the 5 birds, I'm studying something called the wheeling hands. So wheeling hands are 28 combinations that you do standing, but you can also transition them between steps, free form. And these 28 movement combinations are some of the most internally complex stuff that I've ever studied. That's actually, that's almost just slightly over Jib and Gong in his Li family system. I would say all of these combinations are as advanced as any of the most complex movement combinations in a Chen long form, Chen style Taiji long form. This is very complex. And of course, there's a lot of transitory stages that I skipped to get to that, I'm working at the level that I need to work right now. But for me, that was complex. I'm at, of the Lunsho is willing hands that I'm studying. I'm at number 11 out of 28. And my hands are full with these 11. They are complicated and confusing. And like when my students ask me like, why is it so complicated and confusing? And I said, because it would be complicated and confusing for the opponent. That is why. That is the point. If you master something that's super complicated and confusing and have it very easy for you, and you can make it work, then that's very extremely complicated and confusing for someone who's never felt or seen it, right? So I'm at 11, and I have to be good enough at these. I'm working on becoming good enough at these 11. So Shifu Brian would teach me the next ones. And it's a complicated practice. Like I taught my students the Tieshou Seqiao. And yeah, they sort of studied the motions in 8 hours, but they are far cry from understanding that form. That's going to take them another 2 to 3 years, each of them. But the wheeling hands that I'm studying now, nah, I can't teach that to my students. That's complicated for me. So that would take a while. And there's no way to simplify it. And what I really love about the Li family system, by the way, it works so well. These combinations, one of the first things I did, I immediately started applying them in freeform practice, like semi-sparring with my students. And everything worked immediately. And I'm like, wow, that's amazing.
That's a rare thing too. That's rare. Usually it takes there's a little bit of a learning curve to reach it out there, but that's great.
But it's very close. It's very close to the Southern Mantis that I did before in terms of overall movement. So I'm used to that movement concept, the way that close range. It's almost like the whole system is something between Pak Mei and Southern Mantis and Wing Chun. It's like in the middle between all of these. I'll explain it in a moment. Actually makes sense. So in terms of the history. So it's so very practical that I've changed none of it. And that's rare. Like the Tieshou Seqiao, that movement form that I put in the beginning, I changed nothing, but then I added like another third to the form just to add many different types of bridges that I know that are very useful that weren't there. But I didn't change any. I just added to the end of it, I added more. And that I use, that my students would be taught or have already been taught, that I wanted those bridges there that add to the total potentiality of all the bridges that you could use. But I didn't change anything before that. And in the willing hands, I absolutely changed nothing, and I see nothing that needs to be changed. It's so well structured. It is as well structured. The whole system is as well structured as Wing Chun. He's quite brilliant. And here's the history. According to Shifu Brian, he's my source on this. I can't verify this. But what he says is, way back when, we're talking centuries ago, there used to be a core founding system called the butterfly hands. Butterfly hands nowadays in the Lee family system is a concept. Now, why do I believe this and why do I find it fascinating is this is butterfly hands. So what some people call yin-yang hands, this pattern, okay? The listeners wouldn't be able to see it on video, and it's a very I'm not sure you could verbally explain this pattern, but it's a pattern where both the palms
It looks like Chun Sao.
It's not this. Look, it's this. It's this. Look. It's this, and this.
Oh yeah.
Here. Okay.
Yep.
So it's Bong Sao. What is this? Not jump Sao. What here?
Fuksao?
Not the Fuksao, but when you just put your hand here.
I don't know. I don't have a name for that one. I've got Lansao. Okay. I've got Lansao.
So it's kind of like, okay, so think like Bong Sao, Fuksao, Tan Sao.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay, so if you look at it, it's slow motion, and sorry for listeners not being able to see this, but it goes like this. So it's 1 and a 2 and a 3. So 1, 2, and 3. It always changes direction. So one direction, second direction. So it's essentially 1, 1, and a 2, and a 3. So you see how it's very Wing Chun-y actually, but it's circular, done in more circular. Okay, so essentially what I'm talking about here, butterfly hands, also called yin-yang hands, is a pattern where you swirl the palms in a pattern of infinity. Essentially, that's what it is. So infinity, it always keeps swirling. It doesn't have a beginning or an end. And this way of swirling the palms in a pattern of infinity is actually correlated with moving your middle dantian and your lower dantian in certain ways. So it's a waving motion of the spine as well as the middle dantian and the lower dantian. Sweetie, you need something? The dates? Here, have dates. Here you go. Wife is hungry. So I stole the dates before. What can I say? They're next to the microphone.
That's internal practice, my friend. Internal practice.
So going back on the butterfly palms, yin-yang palms, the amazing thing is I studied that skill as the main engine of the Chingchen Mountain Bagua that I studied under Shifu Stephen. And then a long time later, I find myself studying under Shifu Brian, and that is the main engine of his martial arts.
I see what you're saying.
The system and our Shaolin, and have no relationship with that Bagua whatsoever. But here's the kicker, and I forgot. The Li family system have a linear Bagua. Another linear Bagua that they created, like this Dong Hai Chuan Bagua's lineages that then created like a linear practice of Bagua later. I'm talking, he has a pre-Dong Hai Chuan Bagua in the Li family system. They have a Bagua, I forgot, that doesn't have circle walking. It has a lot of circle stepping, but no circle walking. Entire forms, no circle walking. And that which uses a lot of the stuff that you see in the Five Birds and all the stuff, other stuff that I was talking about. And I showed Shifu Brian's Bagua to Shifu Stephen. Shifu Stephen's like, wow, that's very similar to our Bagua. I'm like, they must be distance 10 generations, 15 generations back, and they have the same engine. That is something. So that put things in perspective, and that made me believe more so Shifu Brian, even though I believe him because he's a trustworthy, extremely scholarly person who's deeply researched the history of his arts. And his contention is this. There used to be this style called butterfly hand or butterfly palms.
He has a book about that, doesn't he, Shifu Jonathan? I think he has a book out about it, doesn't he?
For Brian? No, he doesn't have. He has a book about the 9 gates, which is a book. It's a theory of 9 gates in combat, but it's not about the butterfly palms. No, I should note there are many styles in China today that are called butterfly palms, but none of them are this particular system. It's just a common name. And he says that system was brought into Shaolin, to one of the older Shaolins, because the Shaolin temple had several iterations. It was burned down or destroyed or abandoned several times because the monks there were heavily politically affiliated. So they would take in refugees from different militaries who lost, generals or some soldiers, or they would actually raise an army and participate in different rebellions and such. So Shaolin, there's a reason the Chinese Communist Party took over Shaolin, made it into a martial arts Disneyland, because they wanted controlled opposition in our generation. They didn't want the Shaolin going back to its military roots because it was very politically inclined and typically against the ruling authorities.
Yep.
So when the butterfly palm system came into Shaolin, it was modified, of course, to suit the temple needs, and then changed and then broken down into several styles that themselves developed over the years. And then Shaolin spread out as a chain of Buddhist monasteries, much like the Juklum temples. The Juklum Southern Mantis Juklum is Julin in Mandarin, Julin or Juklum is bamboo forest. Bamboo forest is the name of a chain of Buddhist temples, a franchise of Buddhist temples that the originators of that system, just several generations ago, they would go around and build those temples and preach their lineage of Buddhism. That was the thing. The martial art was attached to that. Martial art was, there are bandits and robbers on the road that we need to deal with while we spread that chain of Buddhism called bamboo forest. This is why it was called Juklum, bamboo forest, Southern Mantis. And it's Southern, for those not in the know, it's Southern Mantis because there are also lineages of a mantis system in northern China, which is a very different martial art, just not related. So that's why the Chinese call it northern mantis and southern mantis. Anyway, so I used to believe, also after reading the book, The Shaolin Monastery by Professor Meir Shachar. Professor Meir Shachar, I actually met him. We sat together for a few hours. In Israel, we used to be, I'm not sure if he's still a professor at East Asian Studies at Tel Aviv University. And he wrote The Shaolin Monastery that's available on Amazon. It's the most comprehensive book ever written on the history of the Shaolin Temple. And his contention was that there was no Southern Shaolin Temple because these temples essentially were so utterly destroyed that no historical remnants survive, at least not recorded in the academia, that he could find. And he did a pretty decent damn job, Professor Meir Shachar, at tracking the history of Shaolin. Apparently there were, though. And so the oral traditions of the Southern Chinese martial arts are true. There were Southern Shaolin temples, not just one, but more than one. Perhaps, some of them were potentially tiny. Maybe they only had 20 monks. I don't know.
Right.
They weren't all as central as the big one we know today in northern China. But they were nonetheless. And then the Li family was a family that inherited from one of those Southern temples the whole system of arts that they had at the temple at one given time. I'm not sure exactly when. If Shifu Brian could give better answers, I'm not sure. It's difficult to convince him to talk about this in podcasts. He doesn't want to get into martial arts politics. So they represent something that in his view was the older version of the Southern Shaolin, which is, in my belief, and I'm going to say something extremely politically charged here, the mother system of what later became Wing Chun, Southern White Crane, Pak Mei, Longying, which is the Southern
Dragon sign, yeah.
And Southern Mantis, all of them. So the Southern White Crane, the Southern Dragon, the Wing Chun, Southern Crane, Southern Dragon, Wing Chun, Pak Mei, and Southern Mantis. All these 5 systems, and of course, also heavily influenced Honga. which is a mix of Northern and Southern, if you ask me. It's like a Southern on a Northern frame often. I think that's how Hongdao looks like. And many other systems, by the way. So I think Shifu Brian, he's not the only one, because the Lee family are still out there teaching. It's just closed door somewhere. His Shifu is still alive. Some people are teaching. He's teaching that. There are probably some others in China or somewhere. Very few people. Some people out there have the mother system. Now, it's not better or worse. It's just that's the origin that everybody's been looking for. Like basically all of the karate people in Okinawa who've written history books trying to track, where these, like we came from this Southern arts, but where did they come from? This is Southern Shaolin, but how did it Southern Shaolin look like? I'm studying this. I think I know what it looks like, really. But, who's going to believe it? Who's going to?
Well, we've got it out there now, my friend. We've got it out there now. Well, my friend, I'm going to have to say this is going to have to be a stopping point for me, because my phone, I use my phone as my medium, is about to go out. But Jonathan, this has been so fascinating. I don't want to talk for my co-host, but I'd like to say that we'd love to have you back on the show another time.
Absolutely.
I'd love to be back. Yeah, it would be wonderful.
This has been super fun. Go ahead, Owen.
No. I was going to say in parting, do you have anything? How can people reach you to start with? And then secondarily, do you have anything that you want to promote or you want to work or you're working on, or classes or anything like that?
Well, okay. So, if you're keen on Zuckerberg's evil platform, aka Facebook, then I'm on facebook.com/Bluestein. That's Bluestein. Facebook.com/Bluestein. You can also write Jonathan Bluestein on there. You'll find me. Or Jonathan Bluestein is Jonathan as JONATHAN. .Bluestein@gmail.com. That's my email. Our official website is on bluejadesociety.com. It would change in the future to something else, because I'm going to have a more Hebrew-focused website with an English version. But right now, it's bluejadesociety.com. Blue like the color blue, jade like the stone jade, society like a society.com. My books, I have 8 of them that I've written and published, and 9th one coming. I'm going to be publishing a 1,000-page long book in Hebrew about martial arts.
Wow.
It's going to be the most comprehensive book ever written in the Hebrew language about martial arts. Unfortunately, it's only going to be in Hebrew. Up until now, nearly all of my books were in English. A lot of what's in that book is available as free articles in English on my official website, or available in my books. Well, anyway, that's how you can get to me. I am going to keep publishing book. There's a huge biography coming of a very famous martial arts master that is coming hopefully within less than a year. It's going to be like 800 pages long. It's going to be amazing. And there are many, many more books coming down the road as quickly as I can write them, which is too slowly recently. I've been busy with Chinese medicine patients, but I'm trying.
You have a good YouTube page too, Jonathan. What is that?
Oh, yeah. So you just go on YouTube and write my name, Jonathan Bluestein, and I have a YouTube channel. Thank you for reminding listeners of that. I have hundreds of videos on there. I have my own podcast with martial arts interviews. I have my own lectures that I record on martial arts and Chinese culture. I have videos of my own teachers and myself demonstrating various things having to do with martial arts. Some of my colleagues, they donate videos and I put them on my channel. Lots of goodies on there. Jonathan Bluestein on YouTube, you'd find my channel.
Awesome. Well, thanks you so much, Jonathan. It's been a pleasure, and we hope to have you on again.
Absolutely.
Thank you so much, guys.
Yeah, you have a good one.
Have a blessed day, my friend.
I see you.